All right, welcome to the build. So it's moving quickly.
And their product velocity is intense. We're both pretty involved in the LangChain community.
This is going to be an industry, like the whole thing is going to explode.
The hype cycle is like, just because you hear everybody start talking about these things doesn't necessarily mean it's the right.
Need to go back, find out more because it's really interesting.
We're both obsessed with AI and their entire stack is just pivoted to agents.
The next question that usually comes after that is like, well, I'm fine-tuning an open model.
That's the biggest thing with the latest spec.
It's an exploding distribution vector.
I'm really excited. I think everybody is. I'm not the only one.
The build.
All right, sweet. You're looking great, my friend. Not that you're my type or anything. Did you get a haircut?
Dang. Kind of harsh, kind of rude, but
You're actually
whatever.
disappointed.
It's not what I was thinking about you, but all right.
Men, we're such just gluttons for attention, aren't we? We're like, yeah, I'm not interested in that attention, but I want the attention anyway. It's like, how are you, buddy?
Good. It's been a good, pretty good week. It's gone fast though. What about you? Anything exciting?
I think I'm having a midlife crisis. So, trying out these glasses, which belong to my daughter. Last night, I couldn't sleep, and I was on Facebook Marketplace just scrolling through secondhand old Jaguars to buy, like XK or
Yeah,
I think it's XJ. It was the sedan, the family version, or like
what years? How old?
not as old as you think. I need at least airbags if I'm going to put my kids in one of these. There's some pretty sick old ones. I don't know. I've always really wanted a Jag, and now I just saw this one, and it was a couple of grand. I'm like, oh man, maybe I could just buy it. I might buy it and then leave it at my mate's place. This is a problem when you become an adult. You're just like, you can actually buy shit. It's
Yeah.
not good. It's not great. But anyway, yeah,
That's all the
pretty good, man.
kids. They laugh.
I've been pumped to chat to you about all the stuff that I've been looking at on this, and then just a bunch of work stuff, getting back into the swing of it. Actually, some of that may intersect on today's show finally, because I really want to talk to you about all these world models and the AI like built environment models.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
kind of like an extension or same idea as the artificial societies that you went through that one day.
Artificial societies is interesting. It's kind of like a simulation. This is actually like a class of models that either seek to simulate a real, like the world in a physics compatible way, which was Genie, like we showed last week.
Oh, right.
Google. But
Yep.
other companies are getting into it, and it's heating up as like a growth area. And the reason why I'm interested in it is because in my day job, I work in the real estate space, right? And 2 years ago, these models were like nascent and emerging, and now all the big players are kind of coming in, and it's heating up. And then it also intersects with this autonomous robotics kind of trend. So yeah, I want to go through some of that in today's show, because it's all like, it's getting pretty wild, and it's getting very frothy. I don't know if you've seen all of these robotic startups that are just getting crazy valuations, and Optimus is coming, and like all of these things, like it's all just happening. It's all happening right now. I also need to make sure I've got Codex set up, because I want to go through the Codex upgrades. But yeah, other than that, man, actually, you know what has happened to me this week, which has been really cool, is I've got 3 kids, right? And you've got a couple of kids as well. Like, it's like life gets a bit chaotic when they go back to school, and like, you're back at work and stuff. So what I've been doing is building like, it's very simple, but it's been amazingly effective, like building projects by person in my family. And then I just dump any kind of document or thing that I get for each of my kids from, say, school, or like reports or notes or like audio recordings or whatever, into each individual project as a subset. And then I went through and took the time to be very detailed in the project descriptions. And it is exceptional in terms of like changing the dynamic of how I use ChatGPT as a product. Just that change alone. And like, I thought I was a pretty higher kind of consumption user, which we can talk about in the show today as well, the ChatGPT trends. But if ChatGPT 10x their price overnight, I would still pay based on these changes, just based on how effective it's been in terms of like tracking and managing all of the different things.
What is it that makes it so effective? Is it just being able to like containerize your context of like whatever project, or are there other features that you've found really useful?
It's the containerization and the context switching, and the ability for GPT-5 to maintain that state across different things. So, for example, I've got twin girls. They have different like interests, different learning challenges, those sorts of things. My son is 2 years older than them, and he's in middle school now. They're all different, right? But then there's the relational elements between them that are embedded in those project prompts and context. And then I've also got one for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I've got like a finance one. I've got like a relationship one with my wife. I've got like a personal development one, right? All of it. And then with enough context in there, it's able to switch between all those things and bring in context. For example, I was talking to, like, going through the project on one for one of my daughters, and then it was basically recommending, say, interaction, sort of like education kind of activities that she could do with her sister, just based on that context, sort of like almost like a very simple prompt that reflects actual reality for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time I'd really actually lent into a really big personal kind of thing in ChatGPT, other than just like personal shit, like how do I go fly fishing, or like just teach me something. It's sort of like, oh, all right, I want to reflect my life in here. Like what Sam Altman says that young people are starting to do. They're using it as an operating system, and I can see the benefit, like in that small window for me. Like it's really transformative. And just from doing that, I'm like, I will be a ChatGPT user for life, right? It's amazing, really. It's just, I'm always surprised that these products continue to surprise me and deliver more value. Like usually that's not the case with software. Like over time, you're just like, all right, diminishing returns, I'm going to stop using whatever it is. It's not the case, you know? So that's been a really cool evolution.
Totally. One day Tiff was like, it's amazing to me that like every single day you're actually excited about something. Like something happens and you're genuinely excited. I'm like, yeah, that is hard. Like it is. It's every day. But I feel you on that. Tom, before we move on, just you said something about the collaboration, and I was going to say that's something that in my household we found helpful, is having like a team account and being able to kind of have joint projects or send things back and forth. But I don't feel like I hear a ton about collaborative AI use, and maybe that's something that
for personal use, you mean?
Right. Yeah, it could be personal use or even team. Like even in a more business world, I don't hear as many people talking about collaboration with AI.
It's a good point, actually. It's very rarely multiplayer, unless it's like Zuck just slamming a chat bot randomly into chat groups. You don't really hear too much about like multiplayer with an AI. It's usually one-on-one or agents communicating with other agents, right? Cool. What about you? What's been going on with you this week before we get into the docket?
Feels like we just did the last podcast yesterday. A lot of different things. The news-wise, I was surprised you didn't bring up. There are a couple of things that I thought you'd bring up here on the Anthropic Economic Index report was refreshed. I think it's just the third version came out, and then
actually, can we talk about that? Can we talk about that now then? Because I kind of dismissed it and didn't go into it because the OpenAI one was so underwhelming. I read the OpenAI one. So the OpenAI released this research report around they released the research report, sort of context, in collaboration with some economics researchers at Harvard and a range of other places. We'll put the links in. And then they had this blog post out, and there is some really cool stuff in there. We can pull it up. I've got a few charts, but overall, I was impressed by how boring they made something that is so transformative. Like it was the most boring thing. This is the OpenAI one. The research, it was just fucking really boring. I'm like, guys, 10% of the world's population is using this and you've got this data set. Like, how is it that you've made this so boring? But anyway, so I didn't go into the Anthropic release after that, but the economic index research that we covered in previous shows is actually really cool, where they try to marry up all the OTel kind of role levels with task-based descriptions and things. So what did they release?
Let me share my screen. Apparently I can't. Well, it's a refresh. Okay, here we go. It's a refresh on the same report. Yeah, and essentially the same data set. Tom, you did, was it the Tableau, I think? You took that data and combined it with another data set, if I remember. So we're talking about the same data. It's just a refresh. And that's where I was hoping you remembered from the previous review, more in the details of like how you interpret this data, because I think for me, I'm pretty hands-on. I need to manipulate it kind of like you did. And in fact, last time, that's what I did. But these numbers are so, I don't know. I look at these and I'm like, okay, well, I can read. I understand what you're saying, but what does, 0.2 versus 0.5? Like what does that really mean? Now I don't even think I have the right paper up. Yeah, this is it. So they have this overview blog post and then they have the actual in-depth paper. I think this is it. But this is what I was looking at, which is the visuals. This is better.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool, actually. So this is their, interactive data set. So the actual data set they publish on a Hugging Face data set as well. So that's where I was pulling it if anyone wants to do some analysis on it.
Yep. They have a link right here on the left, download data set, and it's the same.
Sick as well.
Files from lab. Yeah.
Can you go to the Jobs Explorer? So one of the things that was most interesting when we looked at these reports from last time was basically a descending penetration of AI use by role. That was probably the most powerful thing. The comparison between Anthropic and OpenAI or ChatGPT is that Anthropic was generally much more focused or used by professionals than it was for personal use compared to, but in aggregate, because ChatGPT is so much bigger, they've still got, in absolute terms, way more work use than Anthropic. But that seems to still be holding, right? What I'm interested in this is like, has this changed in terms of their massive overrepresentation in coding versus other roles? And then they did go to the effort of basically saying these are automation versus augmentation tasks distributed across their data set, which is the best way to look at it, because you can try and understand, well, like, is this a co-pilot or is this a replacement?
Yeah. And I was actually, meant to look up like how do you define augmentative versus automation? I don't remember exactly how they're defining that, but tell me the other thing that I don't know.
It was very simple. It was very simple. It was basically just like, do this for me or help me do this. It's basically, I'm trying to figure this out, get me an answer, or can you do this for me, which is like, write this email. That's basically the distinction.
Yeah. Okay. It shouldn't surprise me, but I don't know. And maybe it's just the way that it's laid out here, but I scrolled all the way to the bottom and you look at the 0% use and I was like, oh yeah, okay. Miners, no duh, ship engineers. That makes sense. But I was a little bit surprised. You start scrolling up here, like how much zero there really is.
Yeah, and I think this is sense. So the way that they try and do this is there's these tasks that the Department of Labor Statistics categorizes into jobs, and if you've ever looked at them, I had to look at these I actually had to do this for my visa application to the US, so that's the only real reason I know about it. You can actually go to a job, like in my case, say it's a sales manager job, and look at the things that you have to do. And any one of us would go and find our job and look at those tasks and think, that's kind of dumb. Like, all of us would do that. It's a very imperfect data set because they're trying to do it across every single role. So for all of those occupations, I'm not surprised that a bunch of them are zero. But like any one of those, say for example, I think there was like fisherman or like boat trawler or something, it was 0%, which is not surprising surprising anyone. But if you set up a recurring thing to send you, say, the weather or the weather report or whatever, like that's a simple example, but that may still be related to a component part of what you're doing for your work, even though it's not directly attributable to that. So they kind of miss a bunch of stuff because unless it's very tightly coupled on the query back to the task, then it was very challenging for them to map them. So that's the only thing I'll say about that.
Yeah, which totally makes sense. And that's why I was saying it shouldn't be surprising, but I don't know. I guess when you're like us, we have so much attention towards AI. It's a little bit shocking still how low these numbers are. But Tom, I think, so you were kind of hitting on the tasks. So they've actually done a pretty good job of the visuals and the filters that you can apply to this. But you're talking about like these descriptions of the tasks. That's kind of the core of the categorization.
Right. So grouping by category for, say, developers. Oh, this is the high level task. Yes. Yeah, cool. So those directly map to the ONET. I always get those names mixed up, the ONET tasks. So if you click on like that provide comprehensive software development assistance, also they make this bloody boring. But then you look at, and then 1.7% of all of the Claude usage is providing comprehensive database development and management assistance. Whereas in actual fact, in practice, that would be a Claude, install Superbase and set it up, for example. Like that's like the practical kind of thing that sits behind there that they, for privacy reasons, both these guys and OpenAI won't publish the actual conversations. Do they talk about because the only thing that these guys really have publicly stated, which was related to their capital raise, is that they have way more enterprise usage than they had before, which is sort of a very convenient story for them to tell when they're trying to raise billions of dollars in capital, right?
Yeah, no shit. You said enterprise?
Yeah.
Yes, this is something
it can also be true.
I had noted to go back on and find out more about, because like 77 automation jump from 27 to 39% of all conversations for enterprise customers. That figure is 77%, which
which is compelling.
Like I said,
it is very compelling.
You're seeing all these super low numbers. I'm like, 77%? What?
But it doesn't say after that. It might say, all right, so 77% for enterprise customers. But Karen is also very annoyed at Claude right now because it's not giving her the answer she needs. And she's kind of upset. Like, it doesn't also tell you those bits.
So,
man, this is cool. Do you want to, I could pull up the OpenAI one and pull up a couple of the charts that pulled out of me. Or did you have any more on this Claude one?
I have not looked at that one yet. So, yeah, that'd be great.
I'm just going to light a bit of a candle, set the mood.
Just after you told me I'm not your type, man. It's too bad.
You're not my type. I don't know what my type in it is in men, but I know what it's not.
That's awesome.
Trying to be honest. All right, can you stop sharing your screen and I'll pull up this boring report. Okay.
I don't know where it fits in, Tom, or if you saw it, but the drama with Anthropic.
What's the drama with Anthropic? While we're still on Anthropic, what happened?
You remember last week I was telling you picked a good week to go on vacation.
Off-grid, yeah.
Because tons of problems, and I think a lot of us were probably. I know for me and my significant other, we're like, maybe I'm just giving it more complex tasks than I was before. Like, just kind of not believing that there's actually something wrong. Like, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. But that was going on for about a month now, and they came out with a pretty detailed report yesterday and said, I think it was starting August 12th, that they had 3 different infrastructure issues that impacted everybody. So you go on Twitter, people are pissed. Sorry, I didn't mean to go into that section there, but I just was curious if you'd seen that or cared to talk about it.
No, I'm trying to stay away from the AI drama space, but I guess it's good that they acknowledged it. And in reality, like, you imagine how hard it would be to manage the infrastructure across all of these products, like
exactly. And that's
challenge.
what I do. I understand both sides because I've been that team and those people so many times. But what we always talk about is it's better to just, like, if it's not your fault, that's one thing. If it is your fault, you need to probably tell people even sooner, and my comment about the Anthropic thing is they could have just put a tweet out and said, hey, we're aware of some issues, be patient. And I would have been, oh, okay, cool. Instead, it was like a month later, I get a very detailed report. I'm like, well, that's not useful now because I already knew all this. Or not the root cause analysis, but it's like, I would have appreciated to hear, hey, we're aware of this. But yeah, I would not want to be on that team this week. And I feel for, I understand too. I get both sides totally.
Yeah. Well, I haven't canceled my Max subscription just yet. So I also haven't used it this week that much. So that's another story. All right. So let's talk about ChatGPT. So this is just a product manager's or a VC's wet dream, right? Like, this is wild stuff in terms of product usage. Daily message volume by cohort. The reason why this is critical is because escape velocity on any product type is benchmarked based on cohorts that come in over time. So if your product usage is getting better as new cohorts come in and use the product, it means that you are effectively iterating towards excellent product market fit. It would be fair to say that ChatGPT always had product market fit, but it's pretty clear from this kind of data that despite what people say about, like, model releases, they are always nailing it in terms of growth, right? Like, they're consistently over time driving this up, and it's become even more exceptional over the past sort of 7 or 8 months, in that this cohort, interestingly, has grown relatively slowly in terms of message volume, daily message volume by cohort. And then you look at this moment, these explosion of usage. It's also potentially related to their expansion to different markets, those sorts of things, but it's just amazing growth.
I was going to say it'd be nice to see like a user base, like active users count overlaid over that. And then, like you just said, I think that, they've had even opened up to new countries, I believe, and regions that they weren't before.
Yeah. Apparently they're pushing big into India, and India's really a high use area for them. Like, that would probably also explain why the volume is so high, but actually, that's message volume. It's not actually your absolute users. So pardon me. I can't correlate those two things. And this is daily messages per weekly active user, which is also telling the same story. But it gives you a sense of just the growth trajectory. Like, it's just amazing. Basically saying, like, they come in, they use it a bit, and then they optimize into more active use over time. And that trend is not going down, which is the perfect product growth kind of chart to look at. But again, sort of like, man, they made this so boring. How did they make this so boring? I guess it was done by researchers and it wasn't necessarily done by the team running the capital raise. Yeah, this basically one of the big things is to highlight from this research is that non-work use is about 72% of all messages in ChatGPT. So it's a significant like personal use primarily. And they basically figured that out from a probability score. So they had this test where they were basically trying to estimate and benchmark the probability of that message being related to work, and then tried to effectively build an estimate so that they could aggregate it across the rest of them. The rest of the data set, or at least that's how I read it. But despite that, they still have more work users, as I said before, than Anthropic and anyone else, just because of this pure scale. I think the only other thing that I found interesting was this, which is kind of like a distribution chart of the horizontal axis being like the category of activity, and the vertical axis being a distribution of the absolute percentage of that within that category. So in personal guidance, for example, a practical guidance, 28.3% of all of the messages in ChatGPT are related to practical guidance. And then within that, there's a practical guidance around creative ideation. That's about 4% of all of the total conversations, right? 5.7% is practical guidance around health, fitness, beauty, or self-care, how to advise, etc. So this is probably the most interesting thing. Interestingly, so 0.4% of all of the conversations, which when you aggregate this out over hundreds of millions is a lot of conversations, is just people asking about the model, asking about ChatGPT. So that's like one in every 200 conversations is basically just chatting about ChatGPT, which is that's a lot. And then here, 2% of the entire conversations with ChatGPT are greetings and general chit chat, which I really enjoyed. I'd love to see how they define general chit chat, but that's also a lot. So what's that? One in every 50 conversations is just, hey, ChatGPT, how you doing? Good? Yep, I'm good too. That's nice. Yeah, you gonna have a good day?
You know what's funny is just last night, for whatever reason, I was sitting there and I've been doing a little bit more with local stuff in Olama. And I was going through all the different models, and I primarily do coding and data analysis and things like that. And so I said, like, what did I say? Write me a story that will make me think. And I guess I don't converse with AI on that level, because the types of responses, like, I'm very familiar with Quinn 3. I really, their models work really well. But then I was like, write a story, and it couldn't do it at all. It's like, I have a totally different perspective on this than probably a lot of people, which we already know, but it just really highlighted that. And some of this is, I'm thinking the same thing where I'm like, yeah, I don't even use AI in that area really. So maybe I should expand my adoption.
You mean in the asking it to generate, or the self-expression or reflection kind of component?
Yeah, because I was just yesterday, we were talking about the whole Claude thing, and you're absolutely right, and all this crap where I'm like, I don't want any commentary. I just want the information. I want it to take action. And I didn't realize that, like, what I just said and that kind of mentality apparently is like a type. I was reading something the other day. I was like, all right, well, I want the information, and like I use it as like boom, 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 not a conversational, what's your opinion on this type of stuff,
Yeah, what's your opinion is interesting. So that's an interesting thing to discuss, because it's trying to look for this chart. So this one is interesting around, it's basically a breakdown of conversation topics by asking, doing, or expressing as a category of kind of prompt, but only for work. And then it's distributed out across kind of work-related tasks. So I'm seeking information. That's 12% of the total amount of work-related queries. And interestingly, yeah, so seeking information, like the majority of that is sort of asking, hey, ChatGPT, I'm trying to understand a tax law in Texas for my C Corp. This is my situation. Can you explain this? And then switching over to, say, writing, expressing, asking, doing is the vast majority of the total amount. So writing is the largest category of anything that ChatGPT does for work-related tasks at 41%. And of that, the majority is just executing, right? Just doing, write this for me, create this. What I really want to do is dive into, and multimedia is similar. So it's kind of the same category, which is like a creative task around output. Multimedia is like doing. It's like almost the majority of the multimedia category, even though it's small. It's only 5.4%. is doing. Generate this image for me, edit this image for me, those sorts of things. What I really want to know is the distinction between, say, the expressing, the asking, and the doing, right? I don't know about you, but I conflate all of those things when I use an AI model into the same thing. So when I'm asking, when I go to ChatGPT, so for example, in the music stuff we'll get into later, I went back into ChatGPT to try and build out the my kind of application project plan, and I used it. I was expressing my need and my desire for the thing, and I was kind of like probing and saying, hey, I'm interested in developing this thing. What do you think? Like, can you give me kind of your thoughts effectively on this? Then once that came out, I basically started asking questions, which is like, hey, I know how to use Python, and I'm trying to figure out what the integration kind of pathways are between this piece of software and that piece of software, only if I can use Python in the back end. So I was asking questions, and it was coming back with kind of constraints. And then I basically said, right, well, after that iteration period in the same chat, write that up into a project plan that I can give to a software, agentic software developer. Like, all of that is one flow for me. They're not separate, you know? So I think it's a bit misleading to kind of say, like, this is like, all of that is one thing in my mind as a user. These aren't separate. Like, we do all of those things.
I said I don't ask AI, like, what do you think or what's your opinion? I meant more like for personal life stuff. When it comes to coding and like what you just said, I do that. That's like part of my standard process. And I think leaving it open-ended, at least for the technical work that I work on sometimes, is more effective, at least in that planning phase. Like, just simply putting, what do you think? So I just wanted to make that distinction.
Right. I do that sometimes. I do ask, particularly if it's a category that I know nothing about. If I've got something, say in the medical space, if I get something that I need to kind of grapple with, I will prompt it to say, well, what do you think? This is the diagnosis. This is the recommendation. What do you think? Yeah, I do that a fair bit, actually.
Yeah. I actually do a lot of leading the models into conversation. Like, if you read through my chats, you're like, does this guy not know anything? But there's I don't know if it's like a method or what, but you can kind of lead them along in your thought process, you know, like asking, kind of acting like you don't know and having it explained to you first.
Got it. Do you do that in order to sense check your own understanding of the topic?
Not primarily, but yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that there are times where AI has ideas I didn't think of. Yeah, that happens all the time.
Or what I mean more is like, you know, when you're steel manning an argument in your mind, and you're like, or what are the things that I'm not seeing because I'm biased? It's good to go to someone and say, without giving them the context of what you know, ask them what they think. It's kind of like a version of that, to try and like benchmark your own kind of biases. That's more what I mean. Yeah. This is interesting, and I guess it's this chart is a really great reason, an example of why the recent antitrust case against Google was dropped, which I was quite happy about, because I'm quite bullish on Google. So I own quite a fair, it's like the biggest holding I have in my portfolio at the moment, full disclosure, is this, which is basically ChatGPT's weekly active users as a share of the internet population versus GDP per capita decile, right? Which basically is saying, like, how many users do they have in aggregate across the total internet population, and how valuable are those users? And between May 2024 and May 2025, they effectively, what was that? They went from just under 0.1% of the median weekly active share of all internet users to 0.3% share of weekly active internet users, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is actually a lot. But they basically went up in aggregate across every single valuable buying group within the internet, basically the internet population. GDP per capita deciles of, say, people who are earning over 70,000 up to an over 70,000 US dollars as a cohort, they've increased dramatically, and that's now the highest group. So as soon as they want to turn on shopping, search in or discovery in ChatGPT in any meaningful sense, they'll crush it. They have really valuable users. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. It's estimates from the World Bank, actually, internet population use from the World Bank. And then GDP decile is basically country share. So it's not individual income per se, but it's like how valuable users are, effectively, is the way to think about it. All right, I might move on from this one. For a boring report, I managed to talk about it for quite a long time.
Yeah. No, the numbers are impressive. Especially with OpenAI, I'm just kind of like, well, you're the household name. Some people think the AI is called ChatGPT. like, so there's a lot of value in being that first household name. And I'm not saying that they don't make amazing technology. They definitely do. But being first and people knowing who you are makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it does. Building the category doesn't necessarily always mean you win the category, but they're definitely on the way. Interestingly, this week, Gemini overtook ChatGPT as like the leading AI app in the App Store. Well, it was the Apple App Store, I believe. So I believe it was related to, Nano Banana and stuff, finally getting some traction. All right, where do you want to go on the docket next? So we've got Codex from ChatGPT 5. We can go there with ChatGPT 5. So basically what happened this week was OpenAI released a customized version of GPT-5 called GPT-5 Codex. So it's a specific model iteration just for coding. And then they also released some features on top of Codex to make it different, better, more competitive. We talked about this last week around how they bought StatSig. They are going to aggressively go and get the developer community, I think. They realize, like when you look at that data, they realize that they're just getting outmaneuvered by both Google and primarily by Anthropic, right? And this is one of those things. They have made a big bet that the interaction pattern for agentic coding will evolve from the IDE into a more ambient agent kind of execution model, to use Harrison Chase's terminology. And that's why it feels different for you and me, right? So when I've used it, I've primarily used it in the cloud environment rather than the terminal. So I'll just pull it up so we can see what it actually is.
I guess that'd be good to compare because I've been using it only in the terminal. The VS Code extension, I guess, is the same if you run it on the local mode, but I've just been running it terminal.
Yeah, so they have basically, if you look at Codex, they have it in. The whole idea is that you could use it in multiple places, right? So if I go to the actual, these are the upgrades. So this is what they've talked through, the upgrades here. I've got a bit of an overview. There is a better interview with one of the developers from this team who talked about the actual launch process from the not the latent space, I believe it's the Sequoia Capital podcast, which I can share in the show notes. But basically he talked about how they released it as effectively like a one-shot kind of just like go off and execute kind of coding assistant, which is how they launched it, right? And then they realized that people needed to do iterative turns with the actual implementation. And one of the reasons why I think that's relevant is because, which goes to kind of like the distribution of tasks we were just talking about earlier in the show, where it's like explain to me, or express, like basically, can you give me a sense of what you think should happen? ChatGPT, Oracle, whatever. Explain or analyze or kind of give me advice, and then do something. And the interaction pattern that developers had across that was actually more like a feedback loop, kind of a creative feedback loop. It's like, hey, I kind of want to do a couple of different turns with this. Give me some kind of advice. And they took the analogy was, say, Stable Diffusion or any of those kind of creative tools. It's like they generally give you a couple of options, right? Options come back so that you can kind of benchmark and evaluate the approach. And creatively speaking, that's generally not what people think coding is like, but actually it's quite creative, right? Because you're like, all right, well, that's how you're going to solve this. So I don't like that implementation. Maybe we could take a chunk of that and redo it, but with variant 2 and with these changes, for example. So that, I thought that was pretty interesting that they kind of tried to optimize it or they've tried to kind of evolve it towards that kind of approach. The other factor is that they're claiming that like the actual execution performance is significantly better with this optimized GPT-5 model, which I'm not surprised by. And they're tightly coupling it with their agents MD kind of protocol or file here, which is effectively just like this is just like a Claude MD
memory
file, right? It's nothing fancy. It's just a text file.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll expand. Their CLI is quite a bit more limited, in my opinion, than Claude, but I think it's obvious they will keep expanding that. And we talked about like the need for orchestration, like a centralized orchestration consoles and stuff. Like it's a disaster trying to manage all these different markdown files and MCP configs and project level, user level. It's a real mess. So looking forward to it. It'll probably just be a couple weeks. We'll be past that issue, but
hopefully, or it's just going to be with us forever.
Yeah,
I think.
So did you have a success like right out of the gate with Codex?
No, it wasn't transformative in terms of my iterative testing in the updates. Although I have to admit, I spent a bit more time on some of the other things for the show, so I have to probably flag it and say once I put some of these really chunky things that I'm going to do with LangChain and this music generation thing through, I'm going to do a side-by-side Claude versus Codex ambient execution on that, because that's super, super tough, and see where it's going to go. But the only thing I do want to call out is that the thing that they have talked about, which is really cool, and I believe is new in here because I hadn't seen it before, is this ability to go from terminal to CLI to cloud handoffs, right? So you can start iterating on a bug or something like that, and then, or it comes from a pull request, because like this is kind of like sitting in the cloud, so it can evaluate your repo or repos or whatever it is you're pointing it at. Pull it down into a local environment or something, iterate with it a bit, collaborate with it, and then push it back up to an agentic ambient execution mode, like that pass back and forth. And that is, I think, quite an interesting interaction pattern that, if it works, will drive adoption of Codex more. Like, I know, for example, at work, like all of our developers, we're on OpenAI, like the whole company is on OpenAI, right? I'm pretty sure no one uses Anthropic. It's not paid for by the company. I use it because I just like it. But something like that, driving across like a developer community within one company that's all on here, would be a significant like adoption factor for driving coding, basically getting them more penetration into the coding community or the developer community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Codex Cloud here is sort of like what they're talking about, which I would be interested to see when they start launching their actual cloud environment. Like we mentioned around the Statsig acquisition, they will launch like an app cloud implementation stack, where potentially you've got like the OpenAI cloud environment where all of your business apps that you've iterated on can be implemented. You've got your agents, kind of like a competitor for the LangChain cloud, agent cloud, all housed within one place, and you can basically execute over the top of all of your apps in this kind of cloud agentic integrated environment. Like, when that's coming, I don't know, but it's definitely coming based on the acquisitions they've made.
Yeah, I totally agree. When you look at it holistically, you're like, yeah, this ecosystem of all these different Codex versions, I guess, it makes sense. It's just, it can be confusing, and I'm still not even clear. Sometimes I'm like, okay, the VS Code extension versus CLI versus cloud local. Like, if I'm running it from a desktop app cloud in the cloud,
yeah,
cloud,
and they did talk about that, and I think the confusion was they thought they were separate products, and they kind of were. The cloud version is like, you can do things in there that aren't as clear or maybe not available in the CLI. And the whole idea is it's just like, right, this is just Codex now, and they're integrated. And the whole idea is they're moving towards like a integrated, always on kind of developer agent that you've just got in your back pocket, regardless of where you are. That's sort of how it seems. The other thing I would highlight is they talked about some of the use cases, which was surprising, because say for an agent like this, a coding agent, you would assume, because it was cloud and terminal first and not as kind of hyper feedback loop like the cursor agent, that it would be working on more deterministic tasks like bugs. So you've got a bug and you're like, go and fix this bug, right? But actually, apparently the majority of the adoption is actually with feature, like new features and feature development and those sorts of things. So it's a lot more creative, which surprised me because developers kind of like those things more than just fixing bugs or doing code reviews, right? So you would assume like developers would probably preference those things for themselves, unless the majority of their cohorts are adopting this are vibe coders, right? Which is an open question. Like, how many professional developers are actually using Codex versus people who know ChatGPT really well and then they want to get into developing, and it's just the adoption path that they have and they don't go to Replit or some of these other tools like we do.
Yeah.
But cool. So that's my roundup. You didn't use it, so maybe have I used it? No, you said you didn't use it, right? You didn't use the update
of Codex? Yeah, I have. That's what I'm saying is I was familiar with the cloud version of Codex, and I'd use that for like the long task execution or bug reviews, things like that. And that's super cool because you can access it from your phone and you can, still interact with it from your mobile device. And so that's what I was expecting from Codex. And then I realized I was like, okay, now it's more iterative. But
I do love the interface. Like, I love the interface that they have. Like, it is cool.
I don't know. I think last week I mentioned it feels like I'm shifting more towards like sub-agent collaboration and orchestration between multiple different, like, for us, we use, even in the chat interface, you kind of naturally are like, oh, I go to ChatGPT for internet search. I use Anthropic for this and don't even think about it. I've kind of found the same thing with like running these coding agents headless or as an MCP server. So you're kind of have full control of it from one place. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I guess they're trying to package that as a service, right? Because it's like containerized, it's in this environment, like it can run locally, but it's still containerized, or it has those guardrails apparently like built in on the terminal now. They didn't like allow it to have network access for a long time, whereas like Claude was just like, yeah, go for it, whatever.
Yeah, and the cloud containers is now mainstream. So
yeah, this is all very ho-hum.
And also that's what Anthropic, I mentioned last week, their new interpreter, it can create Office files like Excel, Word, PowerPoint, and do some with PDF. That all runs in a cloud container, but not the same as like Codex, So
yeah, I don't know who's doing the containerization for these guys, but yeah, E2B is doing it now for Anthropic, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Keen to play with it again. Like this is like, it's just setting this thing up. Like I just asked it to look at my personal website here, which is pretty basic, and look for some bugs. And now it's going for it. Let's see, I'm reviewing the structure. Yeah, cool. Consistently amazed that, because I meet a fair few developers and technical people, that there are people who don't use these things. There are so many outstanding bugs on so many different repos. I'm just like, guys, just like point these tools at it and just give it a go. Like what do you have to lose? Like the bug is there. It's been there for years. Just go for it. Like, and that was another thing that was, I guess, a proof point for the guys building Codex, is they said that there was like, I think it's like something like, I'll double check the numbers, but it's something like 400,000 pull requests around, on different repos, of which 390 odd thousand have been resolved, like worked on and resolved by Codex since its launch.
Well, and then you have the opposite problem of the AI generating the false bugs and stuff like that too.
Yeah. And one of the open questions is like, well, will developers just be like code reviewers, which they are at the moment, but that pain should go away, because then you can have custom agentic workflows that also review code and implement. All right. So that's Codex. Do you want to move on to, I'm really keen to talk to you about this Google DeepMind research and the agent payment rails that they launched. That was a late addition I put into the show notes, if you saw that. Or did you have anything else on Codex or any of that before we move on?
No, I don't think so. I listened to something recently from, the CEO, DeepMind. Maybe we already talked about this. He was talking about like fluid dynamics and all this stuff that was super interesting. I can't remember. Maybe that was on like Lex Friedman.
Yeah. I listened to that interview. Yeah, that was the same guy. Like, so that's who I was telling you about, Demis Hassabis, right? He is such an amazing guy. I'm such a fanboy, but I didn't really get like the implications of that. Like, so how hard fluid dynamics? I didn't study engineering, but apparently, yeah, fluid dynamics is pretty challenging, right? It's challenging to model, but then I didn't really understand the implications of being able to model it at scale. Like, so if you can model fluid dynamics, then that means you can model weather at like a prediction accuracy level that's just like nothing we've ever imagined, right? There's sort of like some very big, very real world kind of positive impacts.
Yeah, and I think that kind of concept is all related to, what's that, Jan LeCun?
Jan LeCun.
He's had some interviews lately where he's like, LLMs are going to go away in 5 years and it's boring and whatever. It's not exciting. And he was talking about more, I think, I could be wrong, I think some of the stuff that you were about to talk about.
Really? Okay. Well, that is interesting, So the two things I want to talk to you about that were interrelated, and I didn't realize when I saw this research report was published, or research paper was published by some people from Google DeepMind on the 12th of September, right? And it's basically virtual agent economies. So it's an analysis and kind of a projection, I'd say, around like, how will the economy change when agent to agent transactions become more dominant, which is an interesting question. So the paper sort of develops this concept of a virtual agent economy, and it describes how we should think about creating markets that are primarily agent facilitated on behalf of actors, whether it's a company or a person or another agent potentially. And what are some of the risks? So basically, they're saying that like there should be a facilitation between an agent economy that is permeable back into the real economy, but that has guardrails so it doesn't create like intense systemic risk against the non-agent economy, which makes sense. Then it also talks through some of the risks around like how they should function, and there will be an inherent inequality in agent markets where high compute, highly resourced agents could out negotiate, out facilitate, out kind of compete lower resourced agents in certain domains and certain topics, particularly when it comes to transaction negotiation, all of that sort of stuff, which I thought was interesting, but it's sort of a reflection of how the actual economy works now, right? Like big countries intimidate small countries. They use their economic power to kind of compete with each other pretty aggressively. Like there's no antitrust, anti-competitive law between markets in international trade, for example. It's all just like the Wild West. Same with currency trading, all that sort of stuff. And being able to put guardrails on something like this is very challenging, like an actual agent economy. Then they talk about how you'd need to build a really high quality kind of credit assignment and allocation rule set that markets agree on, in terms of like an agent transacting with another agent, how an agent then goes back and says, well, for example, I engaged 5 agents to do this task. It might be a creative writing task that are facilitated by other providers in the marketplace. How does credit assignment go back to all of those individual agents when I get my completed piece of work? How does penalty or reward fit into that, where you might need, say, one of the agents made a mistake and there needs to be a penalty assignment, and how do you claw back components of your transaction, and how are contracts upheld in an agent economy, kind of like they are in the real economy, in the business economy, because the reliability of contracts is probably one of the more important components of a functioning economic engine or economic system, right? So all of those things need to be figured out. But it is pretty exciting when to think about it. A couple of the things that they also talked about is how, like, they're a little bit kind of naive in terms of how these things are going to work, because you can't just define the entire agent economy. You can just create other agent economies. And this is sort of like what happens in crypto, right? Like if you don't like one coin, you just go and create other coins, you just get access. So actually the market forces will drive adoption across these different things. You can't necessarily put 100% oversight over it unless you engage like actual power. So actually, have government involvement in something like this. So it's pretty interesting. They talk a little bit about crypto as well, and how verification would need to be kind of built in, and also this idea of agent traps, which I thought was pretty interesting, where like they can foresee a world where like agent traps and spammers basically kind of trap and extract transactions from agents using kind of like a cybersecurity breach, but actually just draining the resources of agents through nefarious means, which is pretty cool. And then also like how agents will replace labor over time. If there is a transaction kind of environment that's permeable from the regular economy, and like, so if that's how it is structured, which is definitely how it's going to be put together for reasons we can talk about in a second around crypto. But if that is how it works, and it is permeable in between, and we are all under the agreement that AI agents and their ability to execute and create will exceed, on average, the output of most humans over time. I think most thinkers in the space are in agreement that that is happening and will continue to occur. Then it stands to reason that the economic environment of those agents will appreciate in value relative to the economic environment of the non-agent, non-AI economic environment, which poses some interesting questions around like who controls it, who has ownership over that economic environment, how do we manage the transaction base or like the value creation, and how does that value creation come back into the regular economy? I was thinking like, is it just as simple as nation states, if this was to play this out in 50 years and like all of this like agent economy or this AI economy has emerged as a shadow economic engine, is the only input that we have then compute and electricity? So you just put electricity in and you just get economic value back, kind of like Bitcoin, right? Is that as simple as it is? And then we just get the majority of the high value economic output comes out of the agent economy. It's a pretty wild thing to consider.
I think guys like Greg Brockman and guys like that that's what they say all the time and have been saying.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild thing to consider, right? And it's interesting to think through.
That's what I was just thinking as you're talking. I'm like, it all seems so far fetched or like proof of like futuristic thing, but no, it's. In fact, Tom, I want to cut in here, but I was curious about if there was a mention of AP2. There's a new protocol.
I just want to mention this and then we can get into the AP2 protocol, because like a lot of these things, this came out on the 12th of September, right? Where they talk a lot about these concepts, right? And there was a significant amount of crypto mentioned in there, but Google hasn't really been in that space at all. They've stayed away from that, right? Which is interesting. I quickly want to just sidestep into this research report from Kathy Wood's ARK Investment. Really kind of, I think they're they talk a big game, and they talk about a lot of transformational tech
Tesla.
kind of trends. And just the one thing that I want to mention is basically this is sort of how they're kind of framing the agent economy, like digital agent economic system around, say, for example, the shopping journey online, where purchasing agents have access to a digital wallet as opposed to, say, a credit card or a bank account. Google Pay, for example, or Apple Pay is a great example of this. And that purchasing agent layer connected to a digital wallet, their assessment is, as these AI agents drive penetration, so you can see it like within the digital kind of transaction kind of economy, their estimate is it could be up to, by 2030, up to a $9 trillion market in terms of like the actual take rate of digital wallets. So companies that control or own a fair share of digital wallets in the market, like Google Pay, like Apple Pay, all those things, as opposed to Visa, MasterCard, or traditional banks. And that could be connected to a stable coin. It could be connected to anything, but basically it's like something that an agent can use to transact on behalf of someone. So that's the prize. Then, spin over to here. Google then released this AP2 protocol, which is fascinating. I might just go, that's the open source website. Here's the announcement, Google Cloud AP2. And it's fascinating for a couple of different reasons. Obviously, it's not a coincidence that they released this research report whilst also putting this out. But what I think is significant is they're really outmaneuvering a couple of other kind of like agent platforms to drive into this agentic kind of commerce space pretty aggressively. Like, I haven't seen any of the other guys do this. Like LangChain hasn't done this, right? And they're the leading kind of agent execution framework. OpenAI hasn't done this yet, as far as I'm aware. And it's designed to facilitate some of the things in that paper, right? So how do you have a human in the loop authorization process for to facilitate a transaction? How do you enable a verification layer? And then how do you know, like, what do you do around accountability when transactions are incorrect, or, the implementation has gone wrong? What's the responsibility layer within here? The whole idea is that they're trying to facilitate the vision that we just described in that paper, which is pretty cool. The next thing I want to highlight is
I'm going to design agents to just get all these other agents to pay me somehow. While it's early on, they just exploit the vulnerabilities and get rich.
Well, maybe not exploit the vulnerabilities, but exploit the opportunities. So that happened early days with
opportunity. That's the word I was. Yeah,
we're not breaking the law, but that happened early days with search. So there were like basically Google employees that identified the like really high value keywords, and they just start like landing pages for like certain, high value keywords, and they made heaps of money apparently on the back of that, just before anybody really realized what was going on, just by providing clicks. But I think this is a bit more kind of advanced now. So these are all of the payment providers and sort of banks and people that are participating or have said that they are participating in this framework. So that's another pretty significant thing, is that they've got a bunch of crypto, regular economy, tech companies, new banks, traditional, card companies, all sorts participating in this, which I guess is what you can do when you're Google. You can really kind of like, you can get people, you can corral a bunch of people, which makes it pretty exciting.
Yeah,
and this is
Google
actually
certainly has an
bank.
advantage. Sorry, Tom. What I was going to say earlier is, like, you mentioned LangChain hasn't done this, no one else, but companies like Google have a huge advantage because we're already familiar. They already have the infrastructure payment, and we already have our information in their systems, and you're already accustomed to it, and they'll make it a smooth transition. Where going with a different provider, you're like, I don't know. We're so used to just giving everything up to like Google and Apple, and without thinking twice about it,
Exactly. The thing I think that also they have a competitive like edge, or I guess a strategic kind of drive to do this, is compared to, say, Microsoft or an Amazon or any of those guys that could also kind of flex their muscle, or even Apple really, is Google have always been the advertising partner for digital commerce, right? They were always the go-to, and for a lot of small businesses in particular, they still are. But one thing that they weren't ever able to crack was the purchase stage, right? They were always top of funnel, middle funnel, driving to a website or like an offline real world conversion, but they never really cracked the e-commerce conversion moment and owning that part. For example, Shopify is like the dominant player for e-commerce, small business e-commerce, right? A bunch of other things. They never really got that far down, whereas this is an opportunity for them to sort of leapfrog that and get further down the stack and connect it up to their own financial toolkit, like the Google Pay financial toolkit.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting strategic kind of drive. A couple of other things. The only other thing I want to call out on this actually, but I'll just show you. So we'll put these in the show notes. Here is they're calling it the Google Agentic Commerce GitHub repo. It's over here. This is the AP2 repo, and I spun through this a little bit. It's all pretty self-explanatory, but you can go through these scenarios. This is probably the most helpful thing to get a sense of what they're actually kind of proposing. So you can actually say, like, here's this human preset kind of scenario around cards and agentic execution over the top of cards, where you might have like a human. This is pretty basic, like human in the loop kind of turn around like an approval request from an agent back to a user when it's using their credit card. That's sort of what you can see, but you can go through here and you can see it's actually not that advanced yet in terms of the actual developer experience, but it's pretty impressive. The next thing is is parts. So they also launched as part of it this X402 payment gateway or payment component, and I love this because it's the HTTP 402 kind of payment required error page, which apparently was like initially built into the HTTP protocol because they envisioned having payments built into the HTTP kind of protocol engine rather than a 404. It's like a 402 payment required, and this is specifically designed for decentralized payment rails built on crypto for agents, right? This is really exciting and interesting and cool because it means that you could integrate your agents from here efficiently into crypto-based payment rails and DAOs and decentralized contracts, and a whole bunch of other use cases can be opened up here, which has been challenging or more challenging to build as standalone. Whereas if you can just hook into a bunch of rails that are kind of like industry standard to get these things moving, then that's great as a developer, right? Something that's industry adopted, something that's banks will trust, where you can also say, oh, and an example might be I'm raising capital, I'm using the Solana blockchain, right? And I have certain kind of smart contracts are built into that, but you just basically can connect it up to your regular bank account. Just wire it over to me and it's all verified, and like an agentic distribution of your employee share scheme can be run on top of that, all facilitated through these payment rails, or even your payroll, whatever it is. That's pretty exciting and interesting to consider, like agentic commerce through that
do much with
that
crypto,
domain.
Tom?
I don't. No, I don't. I've always found it to be too speculative, but like it didn't really have any use. Like the best one I was really excited by was Ethereum, right? Because it actually had kind of a bit of a actual use case behind it. Now Solana is probably the better one that I'm more interested in, but even then it's like it's not as useful. I think now with this changes that the federal government in the US is making around stablecoins, it's actually people are realizing that the number one innovation of crypto is actually the US dollar, which I think is very funny. But once you can implement kind of more reliable, less speculative kind of asset value across these different things as things like this as a developer, then yeah, it makes me want to get back into it. What about you?
Yeah, I stay away from like I was into Bitcoin and some other coins like early on. Well, yeah, like in the would have been rich type of days, but it's one of those things I stay away from it. It's kind of like almost dangerous, where I know my personality and it's not something I need to have like as a hobby or my like moving serious money into, But the reason I asked is because it's starting to come into play with a lot of these, agentic architectures and leading into the future. And it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, maybe I should spend some time learning more about this, but also have to be careful too. Like, I don't know where it's applicable, what's actually useful.
I agree. And that was sort of one of the reasons I sort of ignored it. Like, and some of the guys that I ran a few startups with, they went into it pretty hard in the most recent kind of crypto wave. And I found it all a bit too degen, like the NFTs and all that sort of shit. But what I like about it now is it seems to be maturing, and there's enough kind of real world financial adoption of some of these assets that means that you could start building really valuable things on top of it that exist in the real economy, and with enough regulatory frameworks to participate in it. Because I think people think of crypto as like it's just betting, and which for like the financial application of a lot of these coins, it is. It's just speculation, as I said. But underneath all of that are some really fundamental, really exciting kind of innovations that create new opportunities for application developers. And the best book I recommend on this is Read, Write, Own by Chris Dixon, because he spends a lot of time unpacking the actual use cases and the actual utility that can be extracted from blockchain and centralized trustless computing environments. That opened my eyes, at least. And I think, yeah, I'd recommend reading that if you're looking for a place to start that's not putting all your money on fucking Trump coin or something.
On Amazon. Perfect.
I'll put it in the show notes as well.
Maybe we'll learn it together along the way.
All I want to do is just set up a wallet and have an agent go around and try and make me money. Like, that sounds good.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to get we can talk about.
Also, I guess not to get it off, but like, have you seen this news about all these NPM breaches, and they're all centered around stealing crypto?
That doesn't surprise me. I haven't, but yeah, that's like.
Yeah, and I don't know, I haven't read a ton about it, but there's been like a wave of compromises of NPM packages lately targeting crypto.
Well, it's a big thing, right? Like, it's a big prize. When it was just user data, that's one thing, but when it's actual cash, that's another thing. Yeah. So I'm not surprised at all. I don't really follow a lot of that sort of stuff, I'm afraid, like the InfoSec news. Speaking of like, could have been rich, I met a couple of guys. Everyone's got those Bitcoin stories, right? And I met a couple of guys at the All In conference. Right. One guy, he's like, I have a wallet with one Bitcoin in it that I bought when it was like the dark web, and like I was just screwing around or whatever, and it was like $250 and I bought it. And he's like, and I still have the wallet. It's encoded with a 10 attempts like passcode feature, where if you get to 10, it basically destroys everything in your wallet. He's at his 8th attempt to try and get this one Bitcoin back out.
Yeah, I hate reading those stories because I'm like.
And I met another guy who he bought a pair of socks back in the day with 2 Bitcoin. So what's that, like a 250?
A pair of
socks.
Sorry, you just broke up. I didn't hear anything you said.
A pair of socks, like one pair of socks that you put on your feet. He bought for 2 Bitcoin. So I guess it's like 1 sock per Bitcoin.
Oh, shit. Yeah.
Yeah. I love those stories so much.
You cannot think about, I've had conversations where like, doesn't that make you depressed? I'm like, yeah, that's why I just don't think about it. Or
actually, it makes me more confident in the store of value of Bitcoin, because so much of it is unsellable. So even if like you had a really serious breach or something happened, or some like trust fail, there's just so much out there that just literally can't be sold. It's kind of like a institutional holding in a bank or something. That means that like, even if there was a run on the bank, at least you know there's going to be a bit of stability in there, because so many people just can't sell. I don't know, there's estimates around how many it'll lost. There's a lot of them. So it sort of like actually makes me more confident in Bitcoin for some reason, like for that reason. Not that I'm a degen crypto guy, but anyway, so that's the Google, agent commerce thing. All right, I've got 2 more things for you today. I've got these world models spin through, which is pretty exciting. AI world models. I kind of wanted to go through that and show you a few things, and then I can give you an update on the music stuff. Where do you want to go first? I kind of want to do the world models, if that's all right, but that's up to you. Cool. So, all right. So let's talk about world models. So the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this, mate, is because last week we talked about this Genie 3 model you can see on the screen here, which is the Google, like, it's been out for a month, right? On this Google kind of world visualization or simulation engine. And there's been a bit of talk about it, about these world models. What do they mean? What are they for? So I wanted to take you through a bit of that. So I saw this from Axios. They had a bit of an update, which is sort of what spurred me to talk about it. But they basically did a roundup of these different companies in different areas where world models and the requirement for spatial AI, effectively, like the fact that these different companies are ramping up in terms of, raising lots of capital, announcing lots of different new models, lots of different applications. So I wanted to spend a bit of time talking through like what it means, why it's significant. Autodesk, for example, they announced the pair of foundation models as part of this. I went to check them out. They don't really have much information out there, so I don't know how much of that is actually real and how much of it is actual just hype. But what I wanted to talk through is like the reason why I'm interested in this. So I work in the built environment kind of space, and one of the things that this sort of spurned in me, other than like an interest in, say, the robotics field or how world models are used in like more industrial applications or those areas, is actually their ability to either accelerate hardware usage or just completely leapfrog it. So this is an example of, this is actually an app that I built with some colleagues of mine a couple of years ago. I won't play the audio, but this gives you a sense. We were using, we use Apple hardware, and we use LiDAR to scan properties, right? So this is part of a full stack solution that we have where we work in the real estate space, and we sell this to banks and a bunch of other companies that want to really understand at a level of high accuracy, the built environment. There's a lot of different applications for this. There's a lot of competitors. They all have different kind of areas, but this is an example of how it works. And from this, this kind of app environment using LiDAR, we render down digital assets from the built environment. In this case, it's like an accurate floor plan that you can interact with.
What was that?
It's like a floor plan. So you can see, like, say, for example, in real estate applications, you might go and say, look at a real estate listing website and it's got a floor plan there. These are examples of like apps that can generate those sorts of assets. And basically the whole idea is it's using, in this case, hardware, LiDAR scanning to create like a digital asset, which is a representation or a data representation of the built environment. This is a very simple example, right? But there are more advanced kind of executions of this that you can do. There's lots of areas in, like, say, commercial real estate or construction or all sorts of things where AI models are starting to heat up where they either simulate the world, like the built environment world, or they take a representation of something that's already out there and enable you to play with it. So, for example, what comes out of our scans is things like this, which is like a kind of like a three-dimensional kind of model that you can then go and interact with and customize and build out. And there are AI models that also...
How's it stored? What is the underlying data?
The underlying data, this is actually an Apple format. This is just a video that I snapped together, but it's actually an Apple format that we use because we build only on iOS, called, I believe it's a Pixar standard for three-dimensional objects. There's a whole bunch of formats. There's like OBJ and a bunch of others as well. The whole idea is it's like a 3D representation. I've actually got a couple here I can open for you and show you. Yeah, here it is. USDZ is the example, and then you can open it, and it's sort of like, it's sort of like a 3D rendered model. That's like a house that, this is a demo house. This is just some random house. But that's an example of sort of what I work with day to day. We do this like thousands of times every month, right? We'll go out to different properties all over the US and we're scanning these things, extracting data, formatting it for certain, valuation kind of standards for different banks, different things. So it's a very common thing. It's a whole industry. The reason why I'm interested in these world models is because there's this class of spatial AI that's emerging that can give you some of those insights, number one, from a more sparse data set. So you don't necessarily need every piece of data in order to get that kind of rich context and detail out of the built environment. That's number one. Number two is you can actually kind of simulate entire worlds to actually try and understand what's happening. So what I wanted to do, try and understand and also then like kind of reflect that back in the real environment. So you can have like these digital twin kind of replicas or a variant of different environments. So you can simulate an entire urban environment and then simulate like an earthquake in, downtown LA and try and estimate what's the damage, how many casualties, how could you prevent it? Like that's an actual real world example of something you could do now because you can have simulations of high accuracy at large scale. To give you an example of one, so this is an example of a company and a competitor. This is a competitor of mine. This is an example of where something like using AI models, you can actually create like a leapfrogging hardware to get better accuracy. Like, so for example, rather than having to use a LiDAR scanner, you could potentially just use photogrammetry and a better analysis model that has emerged, and there are public ones on Hugging Face, to basically visualize an environment and then effectively measure it out, just like I would if I was using a LiDAR scanner. That's an example of one like leapfrogging that these AI models, that wasn't possible 2 years ago, or it wasn't easy and it was very computationally expensive. But those things are emerging now, and that's interesting to think about, like how do these world models leapfrog what were hardware solutions in the past. It's also applicable in, say, for example, in like like larger scale kind of imagery that you might capture from satellites, for example, and how you can use these AI models to simulate things that weren't necessarily, or to derive insights that weren't necessarily available before. And we covered that on the previous episode, the Alpha Earth model that Google had released, where it was trying to aggregate all those data sets to simulate or give you an ability to simulate the world using these different data sets and like a quote unquote world model. Let's jump in here. So effectively, like you upload an image or a couple of images and you get a 3D rendered down kind of either environment. This one's pretty cool, this painting studio. The environment or an individual object. Now we've covered objects and the object component's pretty irregular, but this is basically like a accurate rendering of an environment just through photos using these kind of Gaussian splat AI models, which I covered a little bit in the creative tooling a while back. So that's an example. Then I actually found that like the actual players in this space, like Meta is actually doing quite a lot here, which surprised me. So did you see they just announced
Why would it surprise you?
Well, like Meta is like in the actual real world, not necessarily in the kind of virtual world. So like virtual worlds, yeah, makes sense. But the real world, not so much. But it makes sense now when I saw they released their new Meta Ray-Ban glasses that actually have like an augmented reality kind of component in there. So they are actually pushing into the augmented reality kind of space a bit harder. But even still, I would have thought it'd be like games, 3D rendering, that sort of stuff, rather than accurate stuff like this. So this is like a map anything kind of 3D construction model. This is open source. You can go and play with it. Like the fact that they just give this stuff away just still blows my mind, because I can pick this up now and just like give it to my devs and say, all right, let's go and build like a photogrammetry replica over the top of our existing use case where we may have spent millions of dollars. We can just go and kind of fork this and kind of customize it. It's amazing, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, like no brainer, there are tons of commercial applications for this. But Tom, I don't work in that space. So I'm sitting here thinking, like, are there things that I could find value in, or experiments I could do where I could learn more about this type of stuff? Or do you feel like it's pretty commercial?
Well, my experience of this is it's very kind of business commercial. Like, so you see all this stuff, like this is an inspection of a house. So for me, I only really think about it in terms of like work activity. There is an area around like robotics, which is probably quite interesting, which you can talk about next. But in terms of like actually practically just playing with stuff, other than sort of a couple of the creative kind of fields, it's not as applicable, I don't think. Like what I actually wanted to show you was this. So for example, this is an actual demo house, like an Airbnb that we scanned. You see this photo, which is the lounge room here. And then if you go down to the bottom, you can see like this is the actual floor plan that was rendered out. And that photo was taken from over here facing towards this corner. So that's actually those are the actual dimensions there using these models. So this is one from Meta. So that's that corner there, sort of behind that thing, going over to that direction. You can play with this on Hugging Face. I'll chuck it in the show notes. You can actually upload like a video as well, and it can render down, an environment, and it will sample. Like you can take a sample interval from the video every second, every half a second, whatever you want. And then you can reconstruct that using these kind of simple, there we go, got my GPU. This might not seem as significant, I guess, to you because you don't work in this space, but to me, it's like it's an example of like, there's a couple of things. Like number one, you can leapfrog kind of potentially like hardware requirements, which is interesting and something that not only we've seen, but I know that Tesla, for example, does this. They've acknowledged that they do this to reduce costs on their autonomous driving vehicles. For example, they train models on LiDAR data, but then they use that model in a regular Tesla with just regular cameras, right? That's an example where you can leapfrog your hardware costs using these AR models. The other factor is it's really important, I think, to remember that just waiting for a while to see what happens is really valuable in this space because, as a company, we might have spent a couple of $1 million building a version of this a couple of years ago, right? Now I can just use this for free. Right? And that's a really critical lesson. Like, don't jump early when you've got really big players doing really significant stuff like this. So that's a 3D reconstruction there. It's not perfect. If you have more photos, you can fill in the gaps, but this is just automatic. It's just running on Hugging Face. Then they also have this ability to say measure. So I can say, all right, well, from that corner there, I want to say I would like to click on the image to measure the distance between 2 points. So if I can say there, yeah, there we go. This isn't working as well as it did before when I tried it. All right, so that's 4.7 meters, estimate 4.7 meters from here to there. So the next step is what I want to do is I can just benchmark that and potentially fine-tune this version of a model on residential real estate against an accurate eval data set, right? Because I've got the eval in these floor plans. I guess I saw this and I was like, this is really exciting. I wanted to share it with you because it's a real life example of like models I can just pick up, data sets I can get my hands on to really affect change. And I encourage everyone to try and keep an open mind to all of these different models when they're trying to solve problems and create value in their roles, because that is a significant step change in terms of how we're thinking about our tech investment, all from the fact that I can just get my hands on this model from Facebook. It's sick. It's really great.
Yeah, totally. That's why, Tom, I'm like, what can I do to get some exposure here? And tell me if this is even on the radar. A lot of people imagine like an agent that knows everything about your life, like your personal operating system, right? So could something like this come into play kind of like in a RAG type of way where like MCP context, like it's pulling in the context of the physical environment? Because that's really when you talk about like knowing everything about me and my conversations and everything that happened that day, there's so much that doesn't happen in text. And even, I'm not saying that this is representing your movements throughout the day, but if you can do that, I would imagine there's a lot of value in providing the agents context based on that. So I'm curious if that's even like possible or.
It's definitely possible. It's not something I've thought about too much because like the built environment kind of spatial AI space really matters to the people who really own and control those spaces, right? So a lot of the spatial AI work and the big data work has been for, trying to figure out and map and accurately reflect, say, roads so that autonomous driving startups can like execute in those environments well. That's an example. Or people who manage very large infrastructure kind of projects or systems like public utilities, public, transport, whatever, all the way down to say real estate investors. So we work in that space because like it's either investors, people who underwrite the debt for you to get a mortgage on the property. They care a lot about that environment and validating that it's accurate. That's sort of more the space that I think these things apply in, with the exception of what I want to talk about now, which is robotics, where that really is an in the home kind of personal interaction kind of environment. But again, it's not really something that you can create yourself and play with. Yeah, so that's what I would say. It's more like the people who care about these environments are the ones that really care about these models. The only other area that it's really obviously applied to is games and media, which we've talked about enough, so I probably don't need to talk about that today, but playing with any of these things is kind of fun in that kind of virtual space. So this is an example of that. So if I want to go into, just talk about robotics for a second. So if I look at, again, if I pull this up, this ARK investment, I'm using Kathy Wood's work a lot on this show. But the reason why robotics, like these world models in robotics, matters is understanding the built environment so you can place autonomous robots into those environments to do productive tasks is one of the biggest prizes in this domain at the moment. It's the intersection between like hardware advancements, robotics advancements, and AI, multimodal AI. And this is their kind of calculation around household robotics, and the total market opportunity they reckon is about $13 trillion. If you just look at like the amount of work that we generally do across our days by the amount of, working age population people across the world, weighted average by hourly wage of $12, and then half attributed to free time versus paid time is 13 trillion. Even if you cut that in half, it's still an incredibly massive opportunity. So that's why these world models are important, because like all of these companies here, Boston Dynamics, Unitree from China, that was really cool. If you haven't checked that out, Figure AI, those guys just announced their valuation from a capital raise, I think it was yesterday or today, at like about $40 billion, up from about $3 billion in 1 year. Like that's how frothy this is getting. The Optimus from Tesla, everybody, they're all coming effectively. So that's why these models are important. Now, Fei Li, who was she's like the grandmother of AI. She did a lot of work on image recognition AI models back in the day, right? She started this World Labs AI kind of company or research lab funded by Andreessen Horowitz and a bunch of other guys. They have this kind of playground, and they released a new model, I think a couple of days ago, for their 3D rendering kind of world model environment, and you can go and play with it. This is really cool. So this is their kind of World Labs space. You can go and like move around. You can prompt text to kind of world model kind of space. You can then like go outside of it and see what it looks like. And it's basically like a rendering down. This is kind of like the example that we showed before, but you can actually just auto-generate them. So it's like a generative kind of experience, as opposed to like photogrammetry, where it's actually like a reflection of the real built environment. This is great for visualization, simulation, training, those sorts of things. And a lot of these models contribute into robotics training. So they'll actually have a simulation environment for robot models to then train on, which is what Dyna, so DYNA-1, they're like a robotics company, startup. I'll put them in the show notes. They've got their own kind of model. And then NVIDIA, they have this Isaac simulation environment where they were the leading kind of simulation kind of model environment against a bunch of these benchmarks for this kind of application around world models, specifically for, say, simulating your factory and then running a bunch of robots around and kind of training them and making sure they don't smash into people and they can actually do the job that they need to do. The idea being that you can run 10,000 simulations of robots within these environments so they can learn faster. And they've got this like cloud environment, this Isaac Sim and I think it's the Omniverse they call it the Omniverse toolkit or environment where you do that. But again, the last thing I'll mention on this is Meta just crushing it. So they've entered this space with a new model called the VJ-EPA2. I don't know what's going on over there, but these guys are killing it with these different models, right? So I didn't realize the depth and breadth of the Meta AI Research Lab. I don't know if you've looked at it much, but like these guys brought this model out like in June, and it's now crushing all the benchmarks in terms of like rendering down a world model for these robotic kind of autonomous robots to actually use, to train with, and actually plan. So this is super exciting, and actually how they built it is pretty fascinating as well. This like prediction engine, so encoding raw outputs and then predicting within that environment in order to train this model on how these worlds kind of environments should be engaged with, interacted with, and robot actions that are taken. As an example, they used it with one of their partners to like fold a bunch of napkins or do these things like these robotic arms. I'm sure you've seen these. And they're basically breaking through all of the benchmarks against, say, the NVIDIA model that I just mentioned. So again, it's pretty exciting. You can then download this, play with it. I think you'd probably have to, I don't think you can run this on locally, but yeah, here is the Hugging Face leaderboard for these models. So yeah, super exciting space.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to check this out more. And it looks like this is related to the Jan LeCun thing.
Yeah, so was he saying like LLMs are boring? We're all going to be using multimodal kind of like models that simulate the world.
That's kind of what I took from it, and I haven't gone in depth, but it was like a couple, I saw him talk about it on a couple different things. Yeah, just saying like LLMs are going to be a thing of the past. It's not going to last long, which I don't know. I don't think it's just for shock value. Like it makes sense. What about, I was thinking about in robotics, like that's an area that I don't even really venture into or have honestly too much interest in. And part of that is probably because it feels like there's such a barrier to entry as far as hardware, where a lot of the things we do with like open source software, the barrier has gone down significantly. So do you feel like that will happen with on the hardware side? And I feel like I've seen like, isn't Unitree or some of these have like open source hardware specs?
Yes. So I believe the Unitree, this is the one that I really want to get, this robot dog. But you can also get these robot arms, which is pretty cool. Like, yeah, you're not going to be like laying out $5,000 for a robot arm unless you've got a real use case. But for example, if you could get a leasing model around this, and then you could create like a food prep process that a basic restaurant could adopt, then I can see that being a business model that you could actually start running as an individual software developer, right? Like that's actually something you could do in a way that's sort of not really, hasn't really been possible. Like I'm not sure, have you seen like the robot arm coffee joints that are in like San Fran airport and stuff? Just makes you a coffee and it's like a little robot arm.
They serve you. Yeah, I've been to a restaurant like that where the robot brings you your food and stuff. It's kind of weird.
The one I really want to get is this robot dog, this Unitree robot dog. And apparently that does have a developer SDK that you can work with. And also I spoke to, so it's only $2,800 US. I spoke to some of the guys at Boston Dynamics. Their dog, which has like, I think it's a bit more advanced, and it has like adapters and connectors and you can attach arms to it and stuff, but it's about $100,000 US. So like it's like a pretty significant differential, right? If you were to think about business applications where basically that's like buying a computer for an employee, right? Like that's that level. What kind of applications you could develop on the top of this kind of robot, if you're able to take some of these models, customize them, and then go to market with a very specific kind of solution for different business applications. It's pretty interesting to think. Like, it's also very dystopian. I don't know if you've ever read Fahrenheit 451, I believe, sci-fi book from like the 20s or 30s. So it was a long time ago, where there were these robot dogs that ran after people in police neighborhoods and injected people and kind of took them down and stuff. And they basically look like the description is basically exactly this.
Exactly. Well, that's what happens, right? Sci-fi kind of determines the future. Man, I went to a manufacturing conference probably 2 years ago. And even at that time, the whole expo area was like these robot dogs running around and the robotic arms. I can't even imagine where it's at now.
Yeah, they're pretty rad. Like, there was a couple of like at a conference I was at, there's a couple of those little robots with like, I think they were the Boston Dynamic ones. They're quite small, just running around. Like, I think someone was controlling them and they had like little boxing gloves on. It was pretty fun. But like, it would be pretty cool to think that you could, here we go. Here are the Unitree developer docs and the SDK. To think you could buy a robot like this and then potentially just download some like or subscribe to different software kind of providers that could enable it for different tasks at home. Like that's pretty cool, very interesting. Or like say if you're on a farm or like you're a small business like construction small business, you could have like one provider of your hardware and then subscribe to different functionalities provided by different software providers, people like us who might then train on certain use cases or tasks. And that's an interesting way that I don't know if the market will emerge like that, whether it will be kind of like the PC market or like where you might have like it's more extensible, or will it be more like a Mac kind of environment where it's all vertically integrated in the hardware and the software has to be together in order to really deliver utility. Do you want to go halves in a dog? A robot dog?
Oh, yeah. Well, I just said, what's your first? Have you thought about this? Like, at what point will you bring a robot to your house?
As soon as possible. Like
as soon as possible.
Yeah, as soon as possible. Like the Optimus one, like benchmark maybe 20 grand. Like you can buy a Unitree robot, right? I think that's 21 grand. There is a question about whether you actually want a whether you want to buy one of these from China. Like we're okay with buying a TV. But like if it's something that comes alive and could potentially crush your skull with its hand, I don't know. Like there's a bit of a question mark about that.
What we do know is when things are convenient, people do not care. And this is like the ultimate convenience, you know? So
like how much are they going to remember of all these guys just punching them and stuff? But like as soon as possible. So I was thinking about that. Like you get one of these, it folds or it does all of your laundry, it does cooking, like all of your household tasks, everything is done. A mate of mine, like, I'm not sure if you've had many friends who've done this. They go to like, in the past, they would go and be like the expats working in Asia or wherever. A mate of mine lived in Manila for a long time. And he said the two things that made him feel like he was the richest person in the world was the fact that he could afford a nanny at home and a personal driver. And we can get both of those things now, right? We can get a robotaxi, like subscription style enablement in a Tesla. I think it's only available in Austin right now, but it's coming to a bunch of places. I signed up for it to get access to it once it comes to LA. So we've got that. And then I could put my robot into my taxi. It could go to the shops and shop for me and come back, right? Like we're there. Like, yeah, as soon as possible. I don't know. Like, why wouldn't the answer be yes?
I don't know. Like I'm a tech guy. I love technology, but it's just, again, one of those things that you grew up your whole life and this was sci-fi and now it's real, you know, it's just kind of wild.
Yeah, man. Yeah. That's why it's so exciting. I'm like, we're living in the future. All right. That's world model stuff.
We have been for a while. Yeah.
All right.
So I guess I hadn't really thought too much about buying like a robotic arm or something like that. I don't know exactly what I'd do with that now, but on that front, is it really that much different than like Raspberry Pis and stuff like that?
Well, these are the developer docs in terms of like, that's the robot dog application. Humanoid, robot, quadruped, developer docs. Yeah, that's the one with the wheels rather than the legs. Robot arm, here's the robot arm developer guide. And it's just control. Yeah, it would basically be like kind of like a Raspberry Pi equivalent, right? You would just be able to control it or program it. But then I don't know about the actual arm control mechanism. Like they don't have a full, it doesn't have a full hand execution, right? Like, and some of these, even the actual robots don't have that yet. Elon Musk was talking about how much of a technical engineering challenge that actually is to get it to be universally usable across the human environment. And it's apparently just unbelievably hard. And for a guy like that to say how hard it is, then it must be very, very challenging to get it to be covering so many applications that humans would want. This looks like it's just like a crusher, right? I don't know if there's like attachments you can buy. The fact that you can just even buy this is pretty rad now that you can just go and buy these robotic arms. Implement your own kind of...
I'm on Unitree's website. It's so random. They have a fitness section. They sell fitness stuff and robots. It's like now you're going to need to work out because you're going to be sitting on your ass all the time.
Yeah. Oh, this is pretty cool. So this robot arm is, I think, is supposed to be designed. It's designed to sort of like integrate with robot, like say they're robot dogs. So like you build as an attachment so the robot dog can open doors, or like, you know, I always think every time I see this, I think like disaster inspections or like, you know, bomb threats and that sort of stuff, right? Which doesn't come up in regular life too often. Yeah, I definitely want one of these.
Man. I mean, like I try not to be I think I talk enough about like privacy and stuff. And I don't feel like hardcore on like doomer side but something to be conscious of. And that's just the first thing that really comes to mind. And I guess we've talked about it a little bit, but the ability to bring your own power, your own compute. It makes me wonder, I don't know, maybe it's just people like me, but will I just have a small cluster at my house? I already do, actually. So maybe the answer is yes, but I don't know. A lot to think about.
I think once these, like the ambient nature of like social media, computers that you can just turn off, like you just close them, the ambient nature of a bunch of those things means that I think people forget a lot about like monitoring and privacy. I think it will be different when there is a robot in your house that kind of looks a bit like a human that you talk to and sees everything. I think that will make people realize and probably change their perception of like how invasive some of these things are. And I don't know what the adoption curve looks like how do you get people over that hump? Or is it that convenience just trumps, like you said, like they're like, yeah, you know, I don't mind that all of my data is going back to XAI. I really hate doing the dishes. My money's on that.
Right.
My money's on that one. But yeah, it might actually change people's perception of the importance of their privacy.
Bet on. Absolutely.
Well, like if you do or say something in front of the robot, and then are you afraid that the robot's going to like, I don't know, because you can interact with it. Exactly. You can interact with it like a human. You can talk to it. It's multimodal. It'll talk back. It has a memory, you know. Maybe that will actually be like a bit more prescient in people's minds, because like ChatGPT remembers you and it can talk to you, but it's on your phone. You control it. You turn it off. Like it's very private. It's very personal. Yeah, a robot's like not personal at all. It's sort of autonomous, you know, for a reason, called autonomous for a reason. I also see it as
it's one of those things where even with AI, just chatbots, we've seen that people are using them for like, as like friends or, right. So you bring in something like that, it becomes like your friend.
Yeah. And that was one of the original
robot. It's not going to have like, it's not like going to have the allegiance to you like a real friend does, you know, like who actually does it? Those are the types of things, and not to go off the rails on that, but it's a real concern. So people need to think about these things.
Like, yeah. I mean, let's just say it out loud. Like one of the first things that will happen is that someone will commercialize and bring to market like a sex machine, right? Someone's going to do that if they haven't already. And so like, yeah, it raises some pretty wacky shit when you really think about this, like for real. And what does that do? Yeah. Like, what does that do to people's relationship? Like all sorts of fucking crazy stuff come out of this, like having widespread autonomous robots that increasingly look more humanoid. Like everything that we've talked about in today's show basically was covered in The Matrix. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched the Animatrix, like the animated short films that came out around that time.
Not that,
but
no.
The Animatrix is basically like everything that we were talking about in that, say, that agent economics kind of environment was covered in that. It's basically around how like the war, like it's great sci-fi kind of concept taken from a couple of key sci-fi books, but the whole idea around like the war that starts between the AIs and the humans is started by as a result of the economic power accreting to the innovations coming out of the AI-based economy, and the robot-based economy and the human economy couldn't compete. So then they basically just went to war. Like, yeah, all of this shit's fucking scary, but exciting. That's why I want my robot dog.
Yeah, but with everything, there's good and bad, just hopefully.
I don't know. Nothing is ever as bad as anyone says. I think, it's hilarious to talk about, but I don't think it's ever actually going to
privacy
come
thing.
to pass.
It could be just my brain, the way that I hear, but like, it's been a little bit shocking to me to hear Sam Altman lately on the topics where he's kind of like raising the flag, or at least making sure that he's like, hey, people are using this shit for like really personal stuff way more than we thought, and you should be careful about that. 2, he was talking about the potential for subpoenas and things like that, and people are putting everything in here. So when you hear someone like Sam Altman, who's like has a big like they have big incentives to pull your data, store your data. For someone like that to be raising those concerns, I think.
I think he was raising it in the context
a little bit differently.
He was raising it in the context of like protected kind of interactions around, say, therapists or psychologists or doctors and those sorts of things, where there's a very clear framework around like when you tell a therapist something, there is a framework that they can follow around when they can and can't breach that privilege. Whereas he's basically like, there's people having these conversations every day that are very private and personal, and we don't really have a framework, in addition to the fact that like obviously you can be subpoenaed and that could be brought against you in court or whatever, but it's not really, there's no real framework. So they can't like go, maybe if someone's talking about self-harm in ChatGPT, it'd be good if there was I actually agree with this one, it'd be good if there was a framework where they were allowed to breach any kind of terms and conditions they have in order to try and prevent self-harm, for example. I think that would probably be good. But it's also kind of like Google. Like you imagine, like every time there's a murder story out there, there's like, there's always like a piece of news that says, and so Googled how to kill my husband or whatever, or how to poison my, like jilted lover sort of thing. And ChatGPT would be no different. In fact, it's probably even worse. So I'm not surprised by that. And that sort of makes sense.
I do not envy people in those positions. I mean, that sucks. And it's a super hard challenge. Yes, I was on that same Sam Altman stuff. He was also talking about you shouldn't have to verify your identity to use models. I'm like, well, dude, why do you have it set up that way in your company?
Oh, that's interesting. What was he saying?
He had an interview where he's talking about these same type of topics and, the therapist and privilege. And he's saying that he does not believe you should have to verify your identity to use LLMs or, AI systems, whatever. And my comment was to use the newest models on your platform, you do have to submit your driver's license.
On the API. Yeah, you got to do identity verification. Yeah. I think that might probably be related to distillation, like from Chinese labs, right? Because they're constantly just saying that their key models are being distilled into like competitor models. I thought that was why they implemented that, but yeah, for only for competitive reasons.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I'll take us way off the rails here. So
that's all right. I might round up with some of this music stuff around like what I found and what's interesting, and then we can close it. Yeah, we've been going for a while.
Yeah, I'm excited.
It's probably enough for today.
So you're using Ableton?
Yeah. So I'll give you an overview of where I'm at and why I think this is a good exercise. So like you and I have both been into music for a long time. It's not my main game, but I really want to get back into it. But what I found really interesting through this process is trying to think like an agentic application developer into a space which is very dynamic, very dynamic in that you're not exactly sure what's going to occur because it's creative output. It's also challenging integration environment. So music kind of production workspaces, like what I really love to use is Ableton Live. It's not as simple as just like a web app. Like there's a lot of other things going on. There's hardware involved. There's different protocols. There's ways to communicate, all that sort of stuff. And the last one is sort of like it's a great exercise in thinking about end state outcomes for a user and how an agentic AI kind of creative environment could be put together to try and achieve those things. So that's why I was sort of excited to do it, because it's a practice, I guess, for as agent engineers to think about that process. So it's always good to like start with something like you like I'm familiar with, I'm the user. You can go through that process. So that was why I thought it was interesting. It was also cool to look into like where all these music AI kind of apps and models and all of these things are at. So we talked about Suno and Udio before, and they're basically like text to music players, and they're probably the best known ones, right? But and that's sort of like the use case there a lot of the time is you're developing something, and I've done this for work applications, you might have an ad. I'm like, well, I don't want to license music. I can just generate the music now. And I go there and I say, look, this is what I want. This is sort of how I want it to flow. And I'll generate some music. That's very different to my application here, which is I want to build a creative copilot that helps me express my musical kind of ideas in an environment, number one, that I'm familiar with, which is Ableton, but number two, doesn't really kind of take over. It's more of an enabler so I can get my creative thoughts out. And that's kind of different when you think about a lot of these agentic kind of creative tools are very human out of the loop. Like it's like, I'm going to do this for you, make a bunch of decisions for you. And it's not really like the interface that you have is like, I'm going to describe something as like, make me, I don't know, an operatic voice with some synth pop underneath it. And then you basically just hands off. It's like, that's the opposite of what I want, which is like, I have musical ideas I want to get out, and I want them to come out exactly the way that I have those ideas. But I don't want to have to go back through the pain of learning to do frequent, like FM synthesis, for example, or like very complex sound design kind of workflows that I used to know when I was producing lots of music, and I've kind of let fall by the wayside, right? And that's one of the biggest barriers, I think, for a lot of creative pursuits for a lot of people is that things like, say, in my case, electronic music production, the barrier wasn't necessarily for a lot of creative people, wasn't necessarily the ideas, it was using the tools. And I think we conflated in that industry, particularly in electronic music, using the tools as creative skill, where it's not at all, right? That is not the creative skill. So what I want to build is that. It's basically like a translation engine that doesn't get in the way. Kind of like if Rick Rubin was to build this using AI, it would kind of be like that, kind of have that kind of feel. He wrote, I don't know, this book you see in airports a lot. I don't know if you've seen this. I just bought it because I really love the cover, The Creative Act. So yeah, so that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Love it.
So where I actually got to, so again, I didn't realize Meta had been so active. So they have a bunch of AI models around music and sound generation. A lot of them were in this, they just called it Music Gen or AudioCraft, I think is the actual kind of area. Like there's a whole bunch of them, but basically it's all within this domain of AI music generation. So the way I'm trying to think about this application architecture is there's like the agentic environment, multi-agent kind of environment that I want to build in Python on LangChain. And into that, I want to connect API endpoints for all of these music generation tools. So Suno, Udio, 11 Labs, there's a bunch of them. They all have APIs where you can kind of poll and request using their text to audio generation. So that's one thing. Then I want to connect it up with these communication protocols. So translating like the output from the agent into messages that Ableton can understand. And part of that is these like protocols. Remote scripts. It's called OSC. Like OSC is like a controllable interface. And then Ableton actually has an API kind of documentation around, well, like, all right, if you want to, open up the filter cutoff on a synth, that is, synth/filter cutoff / and then like a control variable to push it up at a certain slope or whatever. Like it's basically a protocol for that. And you can interface through that through a platform called Max for Live, or Max, which is kind of like a development environment. And then connect all of those up into functionality. So for example, I want to basically have it so that when I interact with my creative partner, I can say, well, all I want to do with you right now is design like a drum kit, like some drum samples and a drum and like an environment. So it can output MIDI. It could output audio, like audio files. It could then also take those instructions and customize the actual instrument as well, but just within that narrow band environment. Or I could feed it audio and say, look, I want you to match the style of this, or I want you to extract the composition patterns and give me advice on how I can use, say, a circle of fifths kind of chord progression pattern, but adapted to this idea, and then give me that as, say, MIDI output or a combination of that and maybe some instruction around how I can play it on my different instruments that I'll be using. Mm-hmm. So I really want it to be like a live interaction partner, kind of like if you were working with a music producer. There's a bit of creative, there's a bit of technical, but it's really about just getting your creative output out. So yeah, that's where I'm at. And it looks like it will work because you can implement these VST kind of plug-in things with Python in the back end, but it's the connectors that are the problem or the challenge.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's a huge opportunity for some type of like middleware. Because the other thing is you're talking about Ableton native applications, and anything I've done with that, I use like a lot of Waves plugins and Sound Toys and all this other stuff. It's once you introduce those third-party plugins, which is like a massive part of that ecosystem, there are tons of challenges there.
Yeah, there are and there are quite a few of those emerging, like both in Max and standalone ones. So when I was looking at, because one of the features I want to build is like voice, and I went deep on like how text-to-speech models are built and why there aren't really that many kind of singing voice models. There are a couple, but a lot of them are sort of like stopped having development work on them, or they've morphed into commercial projects or whatever. A lot of them are just standalone VSTs, or the way some developers have attacked this is they're trying to go the whole DAW kind of replacement. They're trying to build like a virtual kind of cloud-based digital audio workstation where it's AI enabled, which isn't, maybe that will work, but it's not really where I want to go with it. The other factor is it needs to be human interactable. So a lot of these are like, all right, I want a synth pad sound that's like 80s retro vibe that sort of sounds a little bit like it was used by the guy from The Weeknd, that kind of sound. It'll usually give you an audio output. And the way that these audio gen models actually work is they're kind of like, some of them have diffusion step. They're kind of like diffusion steps, right? What they'll actually do is they'll take the text, and they've been trained on a bunch of spectrogram images, which is basically a visualization image of audio represented over time. So like it's like time and frequency and intensity of the color represents it's a spectrogram image of the audio waveform, and then it'll generate that based on its training data as almost like an image diffusion model. And then there's a vocoder that takes that and synthesizes it into an actual audio file, which is pretty nuts. But like that is very challenging to represent when you go from, say, just like basic speech to all of the phonetic expression of, say, an opera singer or anything like that. Like, so there's actually significantly more complexity in it. And some of the like basic voice gen VSTs are not great. Like I've tested a couple now through this process and they're not great. So I'm hopeful that I can get to that point. The other thing I was thinking about embedding in here, and then I can go through some of the recommendations for different things you can check out if you want, is, and I'll put them all in the show notes, you can try them out, is the idea of like a fine tune, like a LoRa fine tune over the top. Once you start using a creative partner in this context, you can maybe feed it your back catalog of stuff that you've maybe produced, or you could feed it referenceable material, and then it will learn and optimize its output into your style. And that's something that I think is pretty interesting, which is an embedding of, again, the producer role, right? Because a producer might work with an artist and they'll kind of inherently understand their style, but then they'll bring in creative elements to kind of enhance it. And I think that's also pretty interesting for this space, which is like a real co-pilot that actually can be fine-tuned to your style, which is not just text prompting. A lot of the people say in Stability Audio, the Stability AI guys have an audio kind of research division. They're like, we reckon it's just like big models that are just prompt engineering for your style. I'm not exactly sure yet. But yeah, so that's where I'm at.
That's interesting. I'll have to send you, it is an MCP, sorry, but there's a MCP server I've used. I think it's just called Music Analysis. And it breaks, I might have sent it to you. It pulls all those, like exactly what you're explaining. And then on a related note, I use a tool called Cosmos. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but I think I have it set up on my Mac here. I use my Windows computer for audio stuff. You load in all your samples and then it shows like the 3D, like Cosmos of all your samples and like they're color coded and based on like what type of sample. And then that kind of relates to another thing. I think I told you about Waves Illusion. I don't know how you say it. ILLUGEN.
Yeah.
But that's a generative for samples. You can generate loops and samples, which is totally different than like a Suno.
Yeah. And those are really cool, those ones. I think the one that I have tested, which is getting better and better, is the 11 Labs music and sound gen package. And I'll probably embed that via their API because you can actually just call and you can have all of the API functionality around that. So I was testing that and it was actually pretty good. So I was like, all right, just generate me a one-shot kick drum in this style and it would just do it. And then they have a looping function where you're like, I want this to be infinite loop. So make 4 bars with a cross rhythm or rumba of like, conga and kalimba or whatever. That one's actually very good. It doesn't have style reference yet. So the Stability Audio one is very good for that, where you can actually reference a style. You load up a piece of audio and you say, all right, I want you to generate me like what I said, like a cross rhythm, rumba style thing with conga and kalimba. But I want you to match this style in this audio clip, for example. And that's pretty cool as well. So I kind of want to have a combo of these things for those. And I don't know, maybe some of those plugins, they just do that or they have their own models.
Yeah, there
are quite a few. Yeah.
You were talking about, I'm super interested, and I think I even mentioned it last week, saying the new Suno model. I uploaded some of my own music and I was super surprised at like the subtleties that it picked up on that only I would notice. There are also plugins like, now I'm just doing a Waves commercial because that's primarily what I use, but they have a whole suite called Studioverse, and they've partnered with famous producers to basically capture their production style, and you can apply it to your music. And it has like, it's been a while since I've tried it, but it's AI. It's an attempt at like AI mixing essentially, and being able to take like, I really like, Rick Rubin's not a good example because he's not like a sound engineer type guy. Whoever, whatever famous producer you like, and you can basically take their presets and apply them to your stuff. So I'm super interested, and I think like sound design is actually, I think, really sometimes more complicated. Like a lot of this music stuff, I think, is more complicated than coding. And if you can figure out how to use all that, you can probably figure out how to code.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting area. Like I want to go through this process, as I said at the start, because it's it's like I care about it. Like personally, I want to get back into producing music, but it's also a great like application architecture creative challenge. But in practice, this is not a very economically valuable space, right? For the engineering challenge. Like I spent a lot of time in the music, like electronic music space, and there are like VST creators, there's like sample designers, there's a bunch of people, but it's pretty challenging. Like for the talent that works in this space around some of these kind of software products, for the economic value that they derive is pretty it's a pretty challenging exchange when they, those people, they could go and make accounting software and probably make 10 to 100 million times more, right? So you really got to love it. That preset thing that you talked about was interesting, because that's one thing that I do want to crack with this, is basically like a style replica. For example, I might say, look, I really like this, I don't know, Deadmau5 song, and I want to take this is one of the features I put in my project plan, but so I want to take the components of this, so extract the stems, but then reflect the style in actual Ableton plugins and presets over the top of it. So it's not just something that I can replay or engage with. It's something that I can tweak and manipulate and modify and then reference back with the AI creative toolkit. The problem with that is that Ableton presets are often in assembly language, like they're like very low level. So you can't actually they don't actually publish like an open standard around retroactively kind of implementing the preset. There have been a couple of people who've tried to reverse engineer it, and I don't know if that's worth the time, but that would be ideal, because then you could take, and they should probably do this, but I don't know if they ever will. You could take a piece of audio and generate like an operator synth preset from a bass sound, right? Or maybe you could just, like, if you could actually get the output, you could just train a basic model to, like, that would be very fast. You'd be able to create a basic model to say, yeah, these presets come in this standard with this audio sample. Therefore, I describe via text my preset and I get the output. Because it's one thing just to get the style, which is like obviously often what would happen with people who are starting music production. They'll get a bunch of samples and they'll put it in, but they can't really do anything after that, because they don't have like a preset in an FM synth or an analog synth that then is mapped back to all of the key macros you might want to do to create a transition or a breakdown or whatever it was. That step is challenging. With a toolkit like this, you'd be able to do that just with natural language. So yeah, it's a big part of it. But I'll let you know how I get on.
I should. I think I've mentioned, like, just been doing coding and stuff. I haven't been doing a ton of music, so maybe you'll inspire me to get back to it. But it's just because, like, when I play music, that's all I want to do.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard when we've got day jobs and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. We're not getting any younger.
Did you see the link I put in there? You can see that they have like producers, so you have like Beyonce's vocal chain, so it gets down to like strip level presets and things like that.
The Waves Studioverse. Yeah, this looks really cool, actually. Underneath each of these, what I was trying to figure out when I was running through this process is like, what are the models these guys have built on top of? Like, how are they actually building these? What are their individual models? Where do they license the data from? Those sorts of things. So it looks like these guys have got their own licensing agreements, right? In order to train these things out, because it's actually real people.
Right.
And then some of the other guys like UDO and like I think Stability, they've got like a licensing standard with a bunch of sample providers that they kind of use in order to get past the commercial use kind of constraints. But then I found like an open source project that's not maintained anymore from like a Chinese lab that's just like no reference to anything. And it's like it's a vocal model, right? So there's some people out there have just been like, well, screw it, just train it on anything that's out there, right? This is really cool.
The other thing you might be interested in now, so I'm sorry, this guy, Jordan Rudess, he's like a prodigy keyboard player. I actually don't know much about his music. I think he played with Dream Theater, still does. But he has some type of music AI startup. And I think he's even like a guest lecturer at MIT or something like that. You'll have to look that up or go on YouTube, check it out, because he's developed a thing that you can actually jam with in real time. Like, it'll improvise in your style.
Yeah, I like those projects. They're kind of cool, particularly with the different styles that I'm not really like that involved with. And actually, just glad that you mentioned that, because Google had a couple of these when they, how they have like the built with Google or with Gemini kind of projects. Basically, when they had like a big rah-rah, they'll basically have a bunch of these random projects that they'll just like publish and say, that's where Whisk came from. That's where the Flow thing came from. They actually have one for music production, which you can fork on GitHub called Magenta. And like, it's okay. It's not amazing. And it's pretty kind of, I think it was sort of like, just a bunch of audio nerds who must work at Google, just like, let's just put something together because it looks kind of cool. And you can check it out. Like, Magenta is like TensorFlow based, and they have like a bunch of outputs and things. And it's just a Max for Live device. But then they also, when they actually had those projects, they partnered with a bunch of I think it was hip hop artists to do like lyrics and lyrics kind of generation back and forth. Like you could actually jam with the AI, which is something I would like to try and integrate, where like you're actually doing the iterative jamming kind of process you would do with like your musicians when you're in a band. It's not a new concept, right?
I forgot about. I think it's different than Magenta. They have. I'm looking for it now on their labs. They had one where like you basically adjust these sliders and kind of improvise in real time, and I thought it was amazing when I first saw it. Still do, I guess, but
yeah, it's a pretty nascent space. There are plugins, but there's no kind of exceptional kind of reactive AI toolkit that I can go to at the moment. It's like a bunch of Max for Live patches, it's all over the place. It's in lots of different places. A lot of these models are kind of closed, or you'd have to pay for them via the API, like their APIs. Like, I think it's an interesting space to explore. My challenge is going to be, which is something I think maybe I can cover once I actually get the initial MVP of this, is how to manage the agent state via LangChain when it's like either it's jamming or it's in production, and how to manage like, all right, this is where the state of the song is and the audio pass back. Like, so how do I get a text in kind of large language model, which is probably the engine, the cognitive engine? How do I give it the right feedback, the right context, like you would a producer? What's the like decision tree and routing mechanism around sort of certain kind of creative compositional things where I might be saying, look, this arrangement here is not great, and I want to kind of work through maybe this cadence structure around this part of the piano arrangement. I think that needs work. How do you pass that off to a certain sub-agent that might be like the orchestrator, the composer sub-agent, giving that the tools that exist in Python now around like, say, analysis. So there are music analysis packages, but then the output from that might be MIDI. How do I pass that to like a producer agent that might then have to translate that back into an edit? Like, this is it's a complex kind of agentic thing, and the cognitive architecture is going to be interesting. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I think it presents like a lot more complexity than you might even think. And even like what I was trying to do with the sub agents in Ableton, like I opened that up the other day. And I was like, yeah, it becomes a cluster because of like the same reasons you're talking about. Like so much has to happen async. I mean,
yeah, which is why I guess it's all like separate, disparate tools. Like you still, as the producer, you go over here and you go, all right, generate me this piece of audio, and then I iterate with it or whatever. But I want it to be like really, like my ideal state would be like it's just an orb that I talk to and describe, and then maybe I sing to it. For example, one of the features is like I could sing out something, and then that will reflect with a sound design element of a certain instrument that I am giving it. Like all of it could just come right from your creative output. It's kind of like, working with like, this is going to showing that I'm a dad. So I watched the Taylor Swift documentary with my daughters, and it has a lot of the footage of her working with her producer in the studio. And it's kind of like that. Like she's got the creative insights and like kind of generation in her, but working with her producer is a very revealing kind of exchange that I'm hoping to kind of embed in this agent, where a lot of those things in her songs come from his kind of understanding of her and what she's trying to achieve, whereas she's just like singing the song and talking about the lyrics or describing changes she wants. And it's a very kind of fulfilling creative process. It's like, I think a lot of people view these kinds of attempts as like, it's like taking away, but actually I think it's more expansive. I think it'll make us better as producers if I can get this right.
Yeah, I think you can make it however you want to. Like if you use things in the right way. It's not the first time I've said that. It's like if you're just generating tracks, chucking it up on your whatever. I don't know that that's
like there's no point.
Much, but like
there's kind of no
use
point.
AI in it.
There's no real point doing that, right? Like it doesn't really make sense to do that because like it's fun, but the whole point of creative and artistic expression is to take something that's uniquely coming from you and put it out, like get it out, right?
Yeah,
like,
but not everyone gets that, because even the guy from Suno, the CEO, he's like, yeah, well, nobody, like, it sucks to learn an instrument. No one wants to do that. So it's like, no, man, that's not accurate at all. Like,
well, no, there are people who don't want to, but I'd call that more entertainment. Like using Suno in that way is an entertainment activity, right? that's more entertainment for you as an individual, as opposed to, you know, like creating an artistic expression, like, which is, and I'm not trying to say that either of those activities are better than each other, right? Like learning an instrument or, you know, watching a movie can be just as fulfilling, whatever, but they're different activities. They're very different. The only other thing I'll mention on this is that Magenta Google project. I didn't see this when I was doing my research on them. They actually do have a specific open weight model. That's an 800 million parameter model trained on 190,000 hours of stock music as well. And then they've got that as on GitHub. You can go and check it out. So I didn't see that in my initial spin through this. So I might check that out again, actually, and see what it's like. Because one of the things of these models is like, Suno, actually, they started on a model called Bark, and Bark is available on Hugging Face. But it's mainly like text-to-speech with expression, kind of like Die. You remember that Die model that came out a while back that was, you could put laugh or whatever it is, and it made expression available in a lot of the text-to-speech models. But the rest of them are kind of closed. They haven't really released these music gen models for these two leaders, like the UDO and Suno seem to be the leaders in that space. So this looks interesting. I want to check it out. All right, that's all I've got for you, mate. We're pushing on 3 hours. We should probably wrap it up.
You were mentioning, I think you said something about like you can sing and convert it to instruments. Check out Voclia. It's so much fun. It's this plugin where you can do that. Use your microphone and you convert it to drums, instruments, whatever. And it's like that can be a very creative tool. Like it's
there are So I'll check that out. But when I was going through like the Facebook Music Gen packages, they have variants of that are on Hugging Face, just collab spaces you can go and play with. They have all these different variants of that. You can like sing into it and say beatbox, but then convert it into a drum kit for a drum version. There's a whole bunch of them. And that's also not necessarily that new, because like I remember it blew my mind like in 2012 or something when Ableton brought that out, where it was like convert like audio to MIDI. And I was like, holy shit, this thing is fucking from the future, right? I was like, oh my God, this is mental. But this takes it to another level, right? There's also ones where there's specific models. So there's SVS models around singing voice models that start with a bass voice, and then you can fine tune into a voice that you design or a voice that you sing, right? So that's like a replication of a voice or just sound design around custom voices. But there's also these GAN models, which are basically like convert this into a different voice or convert this voice into a synthesizer or the reverse, whatever, like, and they're a different model class. And then there's a bunch of those ones out there as well that run a bunch of these plugins, like kind of like auto-tune on steroids. So there have been a bunch of these kind of like small incremental kind of innovations just at the plugin level as well. I'll put all of these links in the show notes and stuff, and you guys can read through.
Yeah, I brought up the Voclia because you can run it like as a bus. I can play my guitar through it and convert my guitar into like a piano or anything.
That's perfect.
And you can layer, so you can run to buses, so you can run like multiple instances. So you can create layers of all these different things by voice or clapping or whatever.
And what I'm wondering is like how much further these AI tools take the existing tools from that. Like, so like as opposed to just going into MIDI and then sound designing your way there from like an audio tool. And one of the things that is emerging around some of these tools that is interesting is like a text to extension feature, which is in a couple of these tools, but also in some of the open source models, which is like, all right, I've got a funky ass beat with like, and then you can just quickly iterate and generate many variants over the end of that and then sample them up like very quickly. And a couple of those are like standalone tools, but even them, I saw some of the demos and I'm just like, well, that just sounds a little bit like Suno. Like it's not a true reflection of your sound. It's just like, all right, this is kind of more like entertainment, like because it was just like generating a bunch of random shit. And you probably never listen to any of that stuff ever again. But the real kind of variation is like where, say, musicians do this, they might be like, they'll just record a bunch of riffs, and like bass players do this all the time. They might be recording a bunch of riffs and then they'll go back through and sample a bunch of those things out and then try and splice them together. And that may be where something like this comes to fruition from. So for example, like the really classic techno hit Strings of Life by Derek May is like, you know, a mega hit from back in the day in dance music terms. That just came from the fact that his friend came around and played his piano that was in his house for a while, and the press recorder is like one of the early digital pianos that had a recording function. Played it for ages, just all this random stuff, and then stopped, went to work. Derek May got up out of bed and just pressed play, and listened to it, and then he heard that bit, the classic strings of life keys, and he's like, and then he just pressed like, and then he just sampled it. He's like, holy shit, you know. It's like that sort of serendipitous stuff that may be more generative out of some of these kind of tools that I'm interested in.
Yeah, exactly. And I've done a little bit along those lines. Yeah, like recording. There's people who make their living recording just like little samples and then doing variations of them and stuff.
Yeah, well, that was Daft Punk's the last album that they did, right? Was they made a jazz, like a disco record of classic disco songs, and then they actually generated a bunch of disco records, threw a bunch of those records, and then sampled them and created the actual songs for the record. Apparently, that's like one of their processes. So it's not. But again, like that's like, it's not derivative. It's like, that's why Daft Punk is so unique, is because they generated the components underneath the hood for the sampling and the digital kind of the electronic music process. I think a lot of people forget that if you really want to generate a unique sound, you need to do every single part of the end-to-end process. You can't, as soon as you start offloading it to these other tools, then you're never going to get a unique sound.
Did you ever watch the documentary, the Pretty Lights color map of the sun?
No. What's that?
No. He went around to different cities and used like tons and tons of session musicians, and he made vinyl. He made like 5 or 10 full-on vinyl records of original music, and then sampled those and made it into electronic music. But it's like all horns music and a bunch of like old people, and he's got a bad reputation. I can't speak on him, but that project was like one of the coolest, most inspiring things.
Which artist?
Seen, really. Pretty Lights.
Pretty Lights. Okay. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
No, I haven't. That sounds awesome.
Check that out.
I love those kinds of ones. Like those kinds of music projects. They're sick. I think thinking more about this, I think I'm going to be more interested in getting into like the sound design kind of, I want to kind of do some like sound design experiential stuff as well. Because then you could get really wild and crazy. Like I mentioned this on the last week's show, like there's some pretty interesting stuff you can do now if you've got all these connected up tools in the generative audio space. That's exciting to think about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's where I'm at.
Are we starting open source?
If I'm going recommendations, mate.
Music repo?
Sorry, what's that?
I said, are we going to start an open source music repo here?
Hey, one of the things on my to-do list, actually, which is something I've really wanted to do for a while, is to really dive into the complexity of either generating my own, because the parameter models on these things is generally less than 1 billion parameters, right? So what would it take to generate my own, or really like customizing one of these leading audio gen kind of models? So yeah, I think so. I'd like to. And then it would be like across the stack, which would be like, all right, there's no kind of text to MIDI model, for example. It's like an adapter. You got to go from text into like some sort of generative space, and then an output via a Python adapter that will put it into a MIDI file. But like that makes sense. Like text to MIDI makes sense. There's no like image to voice. Like I love an image to voice model. So if I could get an image of a singer and it generates a voice, there's some cool concepts, right?
Yeah.
Like, so if you
know what, Tom, I've said this to a bunch of people, and everyone thinks I'm crazy. I get it. And it's meant to be kind of a weird question, but like when I first learned about embeddings and things like that, it made me think like, what is the color of that song?
Yeah. Well, literally, like this is not hypothetical. Like I was describing, literally some of these models function that way, in that it's an embedding, like the training material is an embedding and an embedding of the audio and a matched spectrogram image, and then a diffusion model that's an image model that actually generates from the description of the audio you want into an image. And then a spectrogram is basically just like that image represented in visuals. And then there's an adapter which takes that and converts it. Like that blew my mind, actually. So some of these audio models are actually just diffusion image diffusion models. So it basically works exactly the way that you're describing, which is pretty cool.
Right. And I guess that Cosmos thing I mentioned, very similar. But well, yeah, we'll have to keep on that. I'm excited to learn what you find out. Maybe I'll get it. Maybe I don't know. We'll see. I got to be careful. You might not ever see me again if I get back into the music stuff.
One of the things outstanding questions I have was, because like I got into music as like a young person just playing in bands, and then I went and studied music at university, and I did a bit of classical music stuff. One of the things I'm interested in understanding now, because I've never really asked the foundation models these kinds of questions, is how much of that knowledge do they already know? Like, could I ask it like, all right, can you like generate me like an arpeggiated music score similar to, say, like Bach, and then adapt it into like a disco funky house kind of adaptation using some of the, say, compositional kind of structures from classical music around like form and like, you know, key changes and all that sort of stuff, and form and like call and response and all those things. Like how much of the compositional frameworks that have been studied for hundreds of years by academics and stuff in that space, how much of that is embedded in these foundation models? Like, is it really in there? And I'm interested to explore that.
Actually then really good on the music theory front. I think it's pretty good in my experience. Yeah.
Yeah, in the creative output sense is more what I'm wondering. Like can it output, like, I don't know, like, could it actually respond to that rather than just explain? All right, we'll explain, you know, Debussy's like dissonance informed like classical style from like Clair de Lune, and then perform like a musical analysis on that. Now, I'm assuming it could nail that probably better than anyone, like any regular person. But could it then create like a creative output from some of those based on some of those compositional techniques? I don't know. Yeah. Something that's usable anyway. Yeah. So exciting times, mate. I'll let you know how I go. And next week I might have just given up and bought like a Moog synthesizer.
Oh my God. I don't know if you have that with music stuff, but that's like one of the most dangerous hobbies ever. I mean, there's so much. That's why
I'm just going to go broke, mate, because like I'm getting back into music, and then I'm thinking of buying an old Jaguar. All right. This has been the build. This has been fun, mate.
Awesome,
Good
Tom.
chat.
Well, it's been good fun, and actually learned a lot today. So I appreciate you as always. Talk next week.
You too, mate. Bye.
All right.